The first light of day stretched over the vast prehistoric landscape, painting the rolling plains and dense forests in hues of gold and amber. Mist clung stubbornly to the low-lying valleys, curling around the trunks of towering trees and drifting lazily over slow-moving rivers. The world felt both immense and intimate, each sound, scent, and movement a thread in the intricate tapestry of life. Early birds sang their cautious, melodic calls, and somewhere in the distance, the low rumble of a waterfall punctuated the quiet morning. Every creature, from the smallest insect to the largest herbivore, moved with a rhythm dictated by instinct and necessity, a rhythm that humans had learned to read and anticipate over countless generations. In this land, the tribe had carved out its existence through careful observation, intuition, and the painstaking passing down of knowledge. Children ran barefoot through the underbrush, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves and the occasional cry of a startled animal. Elders watched patiently from shaded clearings, eyes scanning the horizon with a practiced vigilance that spoke of a lifetime spent negotiating the precarious balance between survival and curiosity. There was a sacredness to the mundane routines, the gathering of fruits and nuts, the tending of fires, the careful preparation of tools. Every action was informed by a deep understanding of the land and its moods, a knowledge encoded in memory, myth, and practice. The air was rich with the sense of earth and vegetation, a mixture of damp soil, fragrant herbs, and the faint, smoky aroma of smoldering fires. Occasionally, a sudden movement, perhaps a deer stepping carefully between trees, or a flash of bright feathers, would break the calm, reminding the humans that the world was alive in ways both wondrous and dangerous. In these moments, awe and caution coexisted in equal measure. The tribe had learned early that beauty often carried the whisper of danger, that fascination must be tempered by respect. As the sun climbed higher, shafts of light penetrated the canopy, illuminating patches of the forest floor in a mosaic of gold and shadow. The river shimmered, reflecting the sky like a ribbon of liquid silver, and the distant mountains rose as silent guardians, their peaks obscured by drifting clouds. In the fields, the tribe's hunters sharpened their tools, testing the edges of their spears and knives against stones carefully chosen for their resilience. Women and older children gathered edible plants and roots, moving with an almost ritualistic precision that revealed an unspoken understanding of the seasons and the cycles of life. Each action, though ordinary, was imbued with purpose, a quiet testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. Even amidst this routine, there was an underlying awareness of the unknown. Beyond the familiar forests and rivers, past the mountains that formed natural borders, lay vast stretches of land that none had ventured to explore. These spaces existed at the edge of imagination, places of whispered stories and cautious speculation. The tribe's collective consciousness was shaped not only by the tangible world around them but also by these unseen territories, which invited both fear and wonder. The mind could wander there while the feet remained firmly grounded, imagining creatures, dangers, and wonders beyond sight, beyond sound, beyond touch. This morning, like many before it, seemed ordinary at first glance. Yet, beneath the golden light and the familiar sounds of life, the air carried a subtle tension, a faint hum of expectancy. Every bird call and rustling leaf felt sharper, every shadow seemed to linger a fraction longer. The tribe moved as though they sensed it too, a silent understanding passing between them through shared glances and small gestures. It was as if the land itself held its breath, waiting for something new to emerge, something that might shift the delicate balance of their known world. In the quiet moments, when the children paused in their play and the hunters rested their hands on familiar tools, the humans of this tribe could feel the pulse of life surrounding them. It was in the rhythm of the river, the sway of the grass, the distant roar of unseen beasts, and the whisper of wind through branches. Every element was alive, interconnected, and alive with meaning. Even without understanding fully, they knew that the world was both generous and unforgiving, beautiful yet merciless. And within this ever-shifting landscape, they found a sense of belonging, a fragile, precious sense of being part of a story that was far greater than themselves, yet intimately theirs. As the sun rose higher, warming the earth and casting long, intricate shadows across the plains, the tribe carried on with its routines, unaware that the familiar pattern of their days was about to be interrupted. Somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond the limits of their vision and imagination, the first whispers of change stirred. A ripple of destiny, subtle and almost imperceptible, began its approach. The world they had known, so steady and predictable, was preparing to encounter something extraordinary, strangers whose presence would leave echoes in memory, stories, and the very fabric of their lives. In these moments, before the first sign of the unfamiliar appeared, the tribe existed in a perfect equilibrium, alert yet serene, cautious yet free to marvel at the small miracles of their world. They were intimately connected to the land, to each other, and to the endless cycle of life that had carried humans through generations. And it was in this delicate balance, this serene familiarity, that the first threads of wonder began to weave themselves into the tapestry of their day, setting the stage for an encounter that would forever alter their understanding of the world around them. Life in this prehistoric world was governed by rules that were never written, laws that existed not in ink but in instinct, observation, and generations of careful teaching. Every member of the tribe knew them without ever being formally instructed. A child learning to follow the subtle rustle of grass or the distant cry of a predator was absorbing knowledge as ancient as the land itself. Survival depended on understanding the rhythm of nature, when to hunt, when to gather, when to hide, and when to move. There was a delicate harmony between action and restraint, between boldness and caution, and every misstep could ripple into consequences that were immediate and undeniable. Hunters moved silently through the dense underbrush, their eyes sharp, their ears attuned to the faintest sound. A snapping twig could signal danger, or opportunity. Each step was calculated, informed by years of observation passed down through spoken stories, gestures, and imitation. The elders taught through example, showing the young how to read the patterns of animal tracks, the signs of weather, and the subtle changes in the wind. Survival was not a matter of brute strength alone, it required patience, perception, and a deep understanding of cause and effect. The unspoken laws of survival were etched into the landscape itself, hidden in the bends of rivers, the grooves of stones, and the sway of grass under the sun. Yet survival was more than the avoidance of danger, it was a social contract. Within the tribe, each individual had a role, and each role carried responsibility. Food gathered or hunted was shared, not hoarded, because the community's strength lay in its cohesion. Conflicts were managed with ritualized gestures, sometimes with stern words, sometimes with silent negotiation, but always with an underlying awareness that a fracture in unity could be fatal. Trust and cooperation were the invisible threads that held the tribe together, and everyone, from the smallest child to the oldest elder, understood that their actions affected not only themselves but the entire group. Rituals reinforced these unwritten laws. Morning fires were tended with care, not only for warmth or cooking but as a symbol of continuity and vigilance. Each spark, each ember, reminded the tribe that the world was alive, unpredictable, and constantly testing their ability to adapt. Ceremonial dances and chants were more than expression, they were education, reinforcing hunting patterns, weather predictions, and communal responsibilities through movement and rhythm. The tribe's knowledge was living and breathing, passed down through memory, action, and the unspoken understanding that nature demanded respect. Within this framework, every emotion had its place. Fear was not weakness, it was an instrument of survival, sharpening the mind and honing reflexes. Curiosity was dangerous but necessary, for it drove the tribe to discover new sources of food, new paths through the forest, and new techniques for living in harmony with the land. Joy and play, too, had their role, especially among the young, whose laughter and energy created bonds, strengthened observation skills, and provided relief from the ever-present tension of daily survival. Even grief had a purpose, it was a marker of the value of life, a reminder that the loss of a companion or relative could shift the balance of the tribe and teach lessons that words could never fully convey. The environment itself reinforced the lessons of survival. Rainstorms could swell rivers into roaring torrents, and predators could emerge without warning, their presence felt in the sudden stillness of the forest. The tribe learned to observe and anticipate, to respect forces far greater than themselves. They understood the vulnerability of human life, yet they also recognized resilience, the capacity to endure, adapt, and overcome. Their world was simultaneously cruel and breathtaking, each challenge a test of skill and spirit, each success a quiet triumph that deepened their connection to both the land and each other. Even the smallest details mattered. The placement of stones along a path could indicate direction or caution, the arrangement of gathered fruits could signal ripeness and abundance. Knowledge of medicinal plants and herbs, passed down orally, was critical not just for treating wounds but for maintaining balance within the body and mind. The line between life and death, comfort and suffering, was often thin, and the tribe moved along it with a careful blend of intuition, experience, and learned skill. Through all of this, there was an unspoken philosophy that underpinned existence: life was fleeting, fragile, and precious. The tribe understood that their time on the land was temporary, that they were part of a cycle that extended beyond individual memory. Every hunt, every gathering, every evening spent around the fire was a conscious engagement with the reality of impermanence. Yet within that impermanence, there was beauty, moments of quiet wonder, the thrill of discovery, the satisfaction of shared achievement. To live fully, the tribe had to respect the laws that governed their world, even when they remained unseen, unspoken, or mysterious. And so, as the day progressed, the tribe continued its routines under the watchful eyes of the sun and the unending sky. Each movement, each breath, each glance toward the forest or horizon was guided by lessons older than memory itself. Their lives were a constant negotiation with nature's demands, a delicate balance between caution and courage, discipline and instinct. These unwritten laws, invisible yet omnipresent, shaped their experience of the world, their understanding of themselves, and the bonds that held their community together. It was within this framework of survival and understanding, of ritual, observation, and instinct, that the first stirrings of change would be noticed. Beyond the familiar, beyond the boundaries of their practiced routines, something new began to emerge on the horizon, a presence that would challenge their perception of the world and introduce questions that no law, spoken or unspoken, could fully answer. The tribe's mastery of survival would soon be tested in ways they had never imagined, and the lessons of the past would intertwine with the unfolding mystery, shaping both fear and wonder in equal measure. As the tribe moved through the familiar landscapes of their home, a subtle change began to stir in the air, a whisper that seemed almost too faint to notice, yet impossible to ignore. The wind carried scents that were unfamiliar, hints of smoke or vegetation unlike anything they had encountered before. Birds paused mid-flight, their calls faltering for a moment, and even the most experienced hunters felt a twinge of unease. Nature, usually predictable in its rhythms, seemed to hesitate, as though holding its breath. It was in these moments that the tribe sensed that the world beyond the trees and hills was not as distant or separate as it had always appeared. Something, or someone, was approaching. The signs were delicate but insistent. Footprints too large and too different from any known animal appeared along the riverbank. Broken branches suggested movement from beings unfamiliar with the subtlety of the forest. The elders noticed the shift first, their eyes narrowing as they scanned the horizon. With practiced intuition, they recognized the faint vibrations beneath their feet, the subtle differences in the scent of the air, and the altered behavior of animals that had long shared the land with them. The whispers in the wind spoke a language older than words, a message of presence, of change, and of the unknown. Within the tribe, reactions varied. Children continued their play, oblivious to the subtle warnings encoded in the environment. Their laughter mingled with the rustle of leaves, creating a fragile soundtrack of innocence amid growing tension. Adolescents whispered excitedly among themselves, sensing a thrill they could not yet define. The elders moved with quiet deliberation, signaling caution through small gestures, a raised hand, a subtle nod, a shift in posture. The balance between curiosity and fear was tangible, creating an undercurrent of anticipation that flowed through the group like an unspoken current. Every sense was heightened. Hunters tested the edges of their perception, listening intently to distant rustlings and glances toward the horizon. The smell of damp earth carried hints of something different, perhaps smoke from fires far away, or the unfamiliar musk of creatures unknown. Even the sunlight seemed sharper, casting shadows that danced and shifted in ways that drew the eye and sparked speculation. For a moment, the ordinary world felt charged, alive with possibility and tension, as if the very land itself were aware that its long-standing equilibrium was about to be disrupted. This heightened awareness was both a blessing and a burden. The tribe knew that misreading signs could mean disaster, yet ignoring them could be equally dangerous. In this world, every ripple of uncertainty demanded attention, reflection, and careful judgment. A single misstep in interpreting the whispers of wind, the movement of animals, or the subtle shifts in foliage could endanger the entire group. And yet, in the midst of this caution, there was also a thrill, a magnetic pull toward the unknown, a reminder that life was as much about discovery as it was about survival. The elders, in particular, understood the duality of these moments. They recognized that fear and curiosity were intertwined, that the arrival of the unfamiliar could bring both danger and knowledge. They remembered tales passed down through countless generations of encounters with forces beyond the tribe's immediate experience, stories of distant wanderers, strange animals, and events that left indelible marks on memory. These were lessons encoded not only in narrative but in vigilance and instinct, a living archive of human experience honed over millennia. The tribe's response was measured, blending observation with preparation. Hunters quietly readied their weapons, testing the balance of spears and sharpening edges against stones. Gatherers adjusted their routines, keeping an eye on both the forest and the sky. Children were gently guided to safer paths, taught through example to move with awareness rather than panic. Every action, though subtle, was informed by an understanding that the world was in motion, that the whispers in the wind were more than coincidence. They were harbingers of a shift that would demand attention, courage, and adaptability. Even as tension grew, there was an undeniable beauty in these moments of anticipation. Sunlight filtered through the treetops, illuminating patches of moss and ferns in brilliant emerald, while birds and insects moved in intricate, choreographed patterns across the forest floor. The sound of the river carried a soothing undertone, a reminder that life continued despite uncertainty. The tribe, though alert, also absorbed these details, finding in them both comfort and wonder. It was a reminder that survival was not only about responding to danger but also about recognizing and cherishing the extraordinary ordinary, the delicate balance of life that existed moment by moment. Philosophically, the whispers in the wind represented more than immediate environmental cues. They were the first threads of a larger narrative, hints that the world was connected in ways beyond direct perception. The tribe, even without conscious reflection, sensed that life was part of a continuum, that each movement, each arrival, and each departure contributed to a story larger than themselves. The wind carried lessons of attentiveness, humility, and readiness for change, lessons that would soon become crucial as the strangers approached. By mid-morning, the atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. The forest no longer felt entirely familiar. Shadows deepened, leaves trembled with a subtle unease, and the occasional animal call carried an edge of warning. The tribe, attuned to every nuance, moved with careful deliberation, scanning the horizon and the trees beyond. In quiet moments, they paused to exchange meaningful glances, silently acknowledging the shared understanding that something unprecedented was nearing. Every step forward was cautious yet propelled by an irresistible pull toward discovery. Even the youngest members of the tribe, though unaware of the full significance, contributed to the collective awareness. Their questions, their laughter, and their unintentional observations highlighted details that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. In this way, the whispers in the wind became a shared experience, a communal signal that bound the tribe together, preparing them, emotionally, mentally, and physically, for the encounter that was drawing ever closer. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the whispers had grown into a subtle crescendo, a chorus of signs that could no longer be ignored. The tribe stood on the cusp of a moment that would test their instincts, their unity, and their courage. Nature, usually steady in its patterns, had sent its first unmistakable message: change was arriving. And within that message lay a promise of wonder, tension, and discovery, a silent prelude to the day when strangers would finally appear from beyond the horizon. The horizon had always held a quiet fascination for the tribe, a line where the sky met the earth, both inviting and forbidding. To the children, it was the edge of imagination, a place where dragons of stories yet untold might slumber and where rivers might bend into worlds they could not see. To the adults, it was a practical boundary, a marker of territory, of land that had been mapped by generations of careful observation. But on this day, the horizon seemed to thrum with possibility, as though the very air above it vibrated with anticipation. Something was moving, something unknown, and the horizon had become a threshold between the familiar and the extraordinary. Hunters climbed the gentle rises of the plains, scanning the far-off hills and the edges of forests. Their eyes narrowed against the glare of the sun, tracking shadows, the shimmer of water, and movement among the trees. Every flicker of light or sudden shift in the landscape was a potential clue, a signal to be interpreted with care. The horizon was not merely a distant line, it was a living, breathing space where the tribe's understanding of the world met the realm of the unseen. Philosophically, it represented the limits of knowledge, the boundary between certainty and imagination. And in the eyes of the elders, it carried a silent warning: what lies beyond may teach, may terrify, or may transform. The younger members of the tribe approached the horizon with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Their steps were lighter, their voices hushed in respect for the mysteries that awaited. To them, the unknown was not solely dangerous, it was also magnetic, drawing their curiosity like a moth to a flame. They imagined vast forests with trees taller than any they had seen, rivers teeming with strange creatures, and mountains that touched the clouds. The horizon was an invitation, a visual poem that reminded them that the world was broader than the valley they had always called home. Yet beneath that curiosity lay an instinctive caution, a subconscious understanding passed down through generations. The unfamiliar often carried consequences, some harsh and some irretrievable. Elders watched over these movements with a practiced serenity. Their eyes, marked by age and experience, read the subtleties of the land and sky, anticipating patterns invisible to the untrained gaze. They understood the dual nature of the horizon: it could conceal both threat and opportunity. Stories told around evening fires had spoken of travelers who arrived from far-off lands, of animals never before seen, and of events that altered the tribe's fate. Each story was a lesson, a cautionary tale embedded in memory, teaching that vigilance and openness were not contradictory but complementary. The horizon, they knew, demanded respect, for it was both teacher and test. As the sun climbed higher, the interplay of light and shadow transformed the landscape, revealing contours that were usually hidden in the morning haze. Valleys deepened, trees cast elongated shadows across the plains, and the wind carried scents unfamiliar to the tribe. Each subtle change sparked a cascade of attention, a sharpening of senses that was both natural and cultivated. The tribe moved in unison, silently negotiating between action and observation, between the impulse to approach and the instinct to wait. The horizon had become an arena of anticipation, a stage where every glance and every movement carried meaning. The philosophical weight of the horizon was not lost on them. It was a reminder that human experience is limited, that knowledge is provisional, and that understanding is always provisional until tested. To gaze beyond the visible is to confront uncertainty, to accept that the world is larger than perception and imagination combined. Yet this confrontation was not merely intellectual, it was emotional, stirring the heart with awe and fear alike. The tribe sensed that whatever approached from beyond the horizon would challenge their assumptions, their courage, and their very way of life. And in that tension, there was a profound beauty, the recognition that life is defined not by safety alone, but by the willingness to witness the unknown with alertness, respect, and humility. Animals, too, responded to the subtle shifts in the horizon. Herds moved with synchronized precision, alert to the far-off presence of something unfamiliar. Birds circled overhead, occasionally emitting sharp cries that rippled through the plains. The river, reflecting the sky, seemed to ripple differently, as if stirred by forces unseen. Every element of the natural world participated in a silent choreography, preparing for the arrival that humans, in their keen awareness, were beginning to sense. The horizon was no longer a passive backdrop, it was an active participant in the unfolding narrative of the day. Within the tribe, this anticipation manifested in nuanced behaviors. Hunters adjusted their grips on spears and axes, checking edges and balance. Gatherers moved with deliberate caution, keeping watch while performing tasks that would otherwise be routine. Children, sensing the collective tension, mimicked the movements of adults, learning instinctively the importance of attention, patience, and readiness. Every gesture, no matter how small, was part of a larger web of preparedness. The horizon, distant yet imminent, demanded that each member contribute to the community's awareness and survival. The elders spoke little, allowing observation and intuition to guide the tribe's response. Their silence, however, was eloquent. A subtle nod, a shared glance, or a shift in stance conveyed understanding far deeper than words could. Knowledge was embedded in experience, and experience was expressed through presence. The horizon was the lens through which this wisdom was applied, a reminder that the future is both unknown and inevitable, and that humans must navigate it with eyes open, senses sharp, and hearts steady. As noon approached, the horizon seemed to shimmer with possibility, a line alive with potential movement. Dust might rise from distant plains, or shadows could indicate figures approaching. The tribe, attuned to every nuance, prepared mentally for whatever might emerge. Their awareness was both practical and meditative, a fusion of alertness and reflection that framed the day as a moment suspended between the familiar and the extraordinary. The horizon, once merely a line of sight, had become a mirror of human curiosity, a threshold that beckoned and warned in equal measure. By mid-afternoon, the first true hints of movement became visible, distant shapes, faint but distinguishable, appearing and disappearing along the edges of the forest. The heartbeats of the tribe quickened, not out of panic, but in recognition that their world, previously steady and predictable, was about to intersect with something wholly foreign. The horizon had shifted from a symbol of possibility to a stage of imminent encounter. Every gaze fixed upon it carried a mixture of fear, wonder, and unspoken expectation, as if the land itself had grown silent, holding its breath for the moment that would define the day. The horizon, in this way, was more than a physical boundary. It was an idea, a philosophy, and a stage for the unfolding drama of existence. To watch beyond it was to confront the limits of knowledge and the inevitability of change. And as the shapes beyond the distant trees slowly coalesced into the unmistakable presence of strangers, the tribe realized that their gaze had prepared them, not only to see, but to understand, to anticipate, and to feel the profound mixture of awe and tension that accompanies the arrival of the wholly unfamiliar. The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible, a flicker among the distant trees, the shift of a shadow that did not belong to any familiar creature. The tribe, already attuned to the whispers of wind and the patterns of the horizon, noticed immediately. Eyes widened, muscles tensed, and the air seemed to thrum with an energy both thrilling and threatening. It was a moment suspended. Between anticipation and realization, a cinematic pause in which the familiar world seemed to hold its breath. The shadows moved deliberately, methodically, yet with a rhythm alien to the forest, suggesting intelligence, awareness, and purpose. Hunters crouched behind boulders and clusters of ferns, eyes scanning the faint forms that began to take shape. The shapes were humanoid, yet different, their movements were precise, unfamiliar, and unsettling. Spears and axes were readied, but the elders signaled patience, reminding the tribe that observation was as critical as action. Each member felt the tension coil in their chest, a mixture of fear and fascination. This was not a fleeting intrusion of wildlife, it was a deliberate arrival, something from a world they had only glimpsed in imagination, now stepping into their reality. The first individuals emerged from the tree line, their forms partially obscured by the haze of dust and sunlight. Clothing made of materials unseen by the tribe rustled softly as they moved, their hands carrying implements that reflected the sun in sharp, strange angles. Faces, glimpsed fleetingly, bore expressions that were inscrutable, neither wholly threatening nor overtly friendly. The tribe felt the weight of this ambiguity intensely, aware that these strangers could represent both danger and opportunity. The air seemed charged, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig amplified in the silence of collective attention. Children were silent now, their earlier curiosity tempered by instinctive caution. They clung to elders or huddled behind the larger bodies of adults, eyes wide as they tried to comprehend the figures at the horizon. Even the youngest sensed that the arrival was extraordinary, that the world as they knew it was subtly shifting. The forest itself seemed to respond. The usual chorus of bird calls was muted, and animals fled or froze, watching the strangers with primal awareness. Every element of the environment participated in this encounter, highlighting its significance and weaving tension into the very fabric of the land. The tribe observed as more figures emerged, moving with coordination that suggested purpose and discipline. Their formation was unlike any the tribe had seen in hunting or gathering. It was organized, deliberate, and silent, communicating a strange harmony of motion and intent. Each step was careful, each gesture precise, and each movement carried weight. The elders whispered to the hunters, interpreting subtleties of posture and rhythm, sharing an unspoken analysis of behavior that would take generations to fully understand. Every instinct within the tribe screamed that this was a pivotal moment, a point of contact that could define survival, adaptation, or disaster. As the strangers came closer, their features became clearer. Faces were partially covered or adorned in ways unfamiliar to the tribe, while their hands manipulated objects of a complexity that fascinated the elders. Spears, stones, or perhaps tools beyond immediate understanding were handled with an ease and certainty that revealed knowledge and skill. The tribe's initial fear began to mingle with wonder, a recognition that intelligence, another form of mastery over nature, was moving into their space. The balance between awe and caution was delicate, and every heartbeat underscored the significance of the encounter. The arrival was accompanied by sound, faint but distinct, the soft crunch of footsteps over uneven terrain, the muted rustle of clothing or gear, and occasional exhalations that carried a rhythm and tone unlike any spoken word of the tribe. Even without understanding, the humans instinctively recognized communication in these sounds, a dialogue of presence, intention, and awareness. The subtle auditory cues heightened the cinematic tension of the moment, transforming the horizon from a distant line into a stage where the known world met the entirely unknown. The elders guided the tribe's response with a mixture of authority and restraint. Gestures were exchanged, signaling where to observe, when to remain still, and how to prepare for rapid movement if necessary. The tribe understood the importance of patience. A single impulsive action could provoke aggression, or worse, shatter the fragile balance of this first contact. Eyes met across generations, and in these silent exchanges, collective wisdom manifested. They were learning, in real time, how to interpret the behavior of beings unlike themselves, an education encoded in vigilance and intuition rather than words. Every step of the strangers seemed purposeful, yet there was an element of exploration, of testing the environment. They paused at times to examine the terrain, touch stones or foliage, and look skyward or along the horizon. Each pause carried intention, a methodical curiosity that mirrored the tribe's own instincts but was guided by unfamiliar experience and knowledge. The tribe watched, absorbing details, the angles of movement, the weight of objects carried, the cadence of motion, and in doing so began a subtle process of understanding. Even without direct communication, humans have always sought meaning in gesture and pattern, and this moment was no exception. Tension reached its peak as the strangers approached the outer edge of the tribe's domain. The distance had shrunk from hundreds of meters to a mere few dozen, yet no action had yet provoked confrontation. The tribe's hearts pounded in unison, a collective rhythm of anticipation. Some elders quietly murmured cautions, while younger hunters felt the urge to step forward, to test the boundaries of fear and curiosity. Each instinct, fight, flight, observe, was in dialogue with the others, forming a complex emotional landscape that reflected the uncertainty of the moment. The shadows, now fully visible as living, breathing strangers, continued to advance with calm determination. Their presence was neither violent nor benign, it simply existed, demanding attention, compelling the tribe to confront the unfamiliar directly. The cinematic drama of the encounter unfolded as light caught on unfamiliar tools, feathers, or adornments, and as subtle gestures revealed awareness and intelligence. Every eye in the tribe was fixed, every muscle coiled, every thought attuned to interpreting the silent language of movement. It was a moment where perception itself became a tool of survival. As the first tangible details registered, the color of eyes, the sway of garments, the shape of hands, the tribe experienced a mixture of fear, fascination, and profound reflection. These strangers were undeniably different, yet undeniably human in essence. They represented a bridge between the known and unknown, a challenge to assumptions and a catalyst for imagination. The shadows at the horizon had transformed from abstract anticipation into concrete reality, and with that transformation came a new awareness. Life, in all its forms, was far larger, stranger, and more interconnected than any story or observation could have prepared them for. By late afternoon, the arrival of the strangers had fully crystallized into presence. The horizon was no longer distant, it had been crossed. The forest, the plains, and the riverbank held witnesses to an extraordinary convergence of lives, instincts, and awareness. Every element of the tribe, from the eldest elder to the youngest child, was engaged in the silent negotiation of perception, emotion, and instinct. The day's tension, anticipation, and awe had reached their peak, marking a turning point in the narrative of the tribe's existence, a point from which nothing could remain unchanged. As the strangers lingered at the edges of the forest and plains, a subtle transformation began within the tribe. News of their presence spread like a current through the group, carried not only by words but by gestures, glances, and the rhythm of shared movement. Even before formal communication, awareness itself became a language. The wind seemed to carry the tension further, rustling through leaves and whispering through grasses as though nature itself was amplifying the tribe's growing unease and fascination. Whispers began quietly at first, muted observations, cautious speculations, but they soon gained volume, threading through the camp with a momentum all their own. Elders spoke first, carefully choosing words that conveyed caution without panic. "They are not like us," one murmured, voice low and deliberate. Another added, "We do not yet know their ways." These statements, simple in construction, were rich in implication. To the tribe, language was more than description, it was the weaving of understanding, the articulation of instinct, and the transmission of accumulated wisdom. Every whisper carried not just information but an emotional tone, fear, curiosity, intrigue, and the faint stirrings of wonder. Younger members of the tribe listened avidly, absorbing every nuance. Their imaginations, previously captivated by the distant horizon, now ran wild with conjecture. What did the strangers eat? Where did they come from? Were they dangerous? Were they divine? Children repeated fragments of conversation among themselves, their voices trembling with excitement and apprehension. Their interpretations were often imaginative, blending observation with instinct and folklore, creating a mosaic of speculation that shifted with every whispered account. These rumors, though unverified, began to shape perception, turning distant shapes into figures imbued with mystery and significance. The tribe's hunters, meanwhile, remained intensely observant, balancing the spread of rumor with the need for concrete awareness. They analyzed the strangers' movements, noting patterns, pauses, and gestures. Some argued silently that caution was paramount, while others felt the pull of curiosity urging closer observation. The whispering of speculation coexisted with the whispering of the wind, creating a dual soundtrack of human interpretation and environmental response. Each whisper added layers of meaning to the day, building tension while simultaneously drawing the tribe into a collective contemplation of the unknown. Rumors were not only about the stranger's appearance but about their intentions. One elder suggested they might be hunters from distant lands, another posited that they were explorers seeking trade or alliance. Some speculated in fear, imagining aggression, theft, or conflict. Others, more adventurous, envisioned knowledge and gifts, new tools, new methods, new stories to learn. This duality reflected the tribe's broader understanding of life, that every encounter carries risk and reward, that fear and wonder are inseparable companions in moments of change. The whispers thus served both as warning and invitation, a mechanism for preparing the tribe emotionally and mentally for whatever might come. Children began to mimic these whispers in playful imitation, their voices rising and falling like the cadence of the forest itself. "They have fire that sings," one said, pointing to the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off the stranger's tools. "They speak without sound," another whispered, observing gestures that seemed deliberate yet incomprehensible. Even in play, the tribe's youngest were absorbing patterns of interpretation, learning to navigate the boundary between observation and imagination, fact and conjecture. In this way, rumors became a tool of cultural transmission, an early form of storytelling that prepared minds for understanding, analysis, and adaptation. Within the tribe, the whispers also served as a measure of collective emotion. Shared fear reduced the risk of rash action, creating cohesion and heightened alertness. Shared curiosity fostered engagement, attention, and imagination. The tension between caution and fascination created a subtle rhythm of anticipation, a communal heartbeat that synchronized with the movements of the strangers. In this dynamic, whispers were both informative and emotional, binding the tribe in an invisible web of perception and response. The very act of sharing speculation became a ritual of preparation, ensuring that each member of the community participated in the unfolding awareness of the extraordinary. Even the natural environment seemed to respond to the escalating human awareness. Birds watched from high branches, their calls sharp and intermittent, while small animals scuttled along the forest floor in nervous bursts. Leaves shimmered in the wind, and the river's surface caught glints of sunlight that almost seemed like signals. The whispers of the tribe, carried through gestures and speech, blended seamlessly with the sounds of the forest, creating a rich tapestry of attention, interpretation, and reflection. The day itself became a participant in the unfolding narrative, a living canvas upon which the first human reactions to the strangers were painted. As hours passed, the whispers solidified into cautious strategies. Elders suggested subtle observation, noting patterns without drawing attention. Hunters prepared to respond if necessary, though the instructions were tempered with restraint. Children were kept nearby, guided gently through curiosity without letting it tip into danger. The rumors, in this sense, had practical value. They directed attention, organized perception, and created a shared mental map of uncertainty and possibility. Whispers had become tools, shaping behavior as effectively as any physical preparation could. Philosophically, this period of whispering highlighted the human capacity for reflection, anticipation, and imagination. In the absence of complete information, the tribe constructed narratives, tested hypotheses, and projected intentions. They balanced fear with curiosity, instinct with reason, and imagination with observation. This blend of emotional and cognitive processing is as old as humanity itself, a mechanism by which individuals and communities navigate uncertainty. The whispers in the wind and in the camp were expressions of this enduring skill, a dance between knowledge and the unknown, anxiety and wonder, perception and interpretation. By late afternoon, the whispering had intensified, reaching a crescendo of speculation and analysis. Every glance toward the forest or horizon carried meaning, every gesture or facial expression contributed to the collective understanding. The strangers, still partially obscured by distance and foliage, had become the center of an invisible web of awareness, anticipation, and story-making. In this space, rumor, observation, and imagination coalesced. Preparing the tribe not only to see the unfamiliar but to interpret it, to respond with caution, and to experience the profound mixture of fear and fascination that defines human encounters with the wholly unknown. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the plains and forests, the whispers subsided into a quiet intensity. Observation became more deliberate, thoughts more structured, and attention more focused. The tribe had transformed a simple encounter with distant strangers into a complex tapestry of narrative, emotion, and strategy. The rumors, though imperfect, had served their purpose, preparing minds, aligning senses, and creating a collective readiness for the moment when the unknown would step fully into their world. And in that quiet tension, the tribe felt the first stirrings of understanding that these strangers were not merely visitors, they were catalysts, harbingers of change, and participants in a story that had only just begun to unfold. The strangers had drawn closer, and now their faces began to emerge from the haze of distance and dust. Each visage was unique, yet collectively they carried an aura of unfamiliarity that fascinated and unsettled the tribe. Eyes met, though not directly. The humans of the tribe instinctively avoided staring, understanding that prolonged eye contact could provoke danger or misinterpretation. And yet, even in fleeting glimpses, there was a profound communication. The subtle curve of a brow, the tilt of a head, the tension in a jaw, all spoke volumes to those who had spent a lifetime observing signs, gestures, and silent language. These were faces unlike any the tribe had seen. Skin tones varied subtly, textures seemed smoother or rougher, and features hinted at distant lineages shaped by lands far beyond the tribe's own. Hair, arranged and covered in ways entirely foreign, moved with the wind, sometimes glinting in sunlight, other times obscuring expressions. The elders recognized the signs of intelligence and intention encoded in these faces: curiosity, awareness, caution, even faint traces of emotion. Yet the overall effect was one of strangeness, a reminder that human diversity extended far beyond the boundaries of their immediate experience. Children, peeking from behind elders' legs or crouched low among shrubs, whispered in awe. "They have eyes like the sky," one murmured. "And their faces are like stones in the river," another said, pointing to the shapes and contours that seemed both familiar and alien. Even in their imagination, the youngest grasped that these faces carried meaning beyond simple recognition. The tribe's ability to interpret subtle cues in expression, gesture, and posture had evolved as a survival skill, and now it was being tested against entirely new patterns. Each glance, each shadowed movement of the face, was analyzed, processed, and stored in memory. The elders, with decades of observation behind them, acted as guides. They whispered cautions to the hunters, suggesting attention to posture and gaze rather than haste or aggression. Their analysis went beyond fear; they were interpreting potential intentions, emotional states, and possible responses. A slight shift of the shoulders, the way a hand held a tool, the cadence of movement across uneven terrain, all of these became data points in the tribe's ongoing calculation of threat and opportunity. Survival was never merely physical; it required reading, understanding, and predicting behavior. The faces of the strangers were a language unto themselves, and the tribe was learning to read it. The strangers' expressions were subtle, almost imperceptible in their complexity. Some eyes flicked briefly toward the tribe, scanning, measuring, as if cataloging presence without yet committing to interaction. Other faces remained partially obscured by hair, veils, or hands, but even these hidden aspects conveyed information: hesitation, caution, perhaps even calculation. The tribe noted every micro-expression, aware that small details could foreshadow intent. In this way, observation became a shared, almost meditative practice, blending instinct, experience, and curiosity into a concentrated awareness of the unknown. The younger hunters felt an intense curiosity that bordered on audacity. "What do they want?" one asked, voice low but urgent. "Are they friends? Are they dangerous?" The elders responded not with answers but with gestures: watch, wait, observe. Questions hung in the air, unresolved yet necessary, reflecting the delicate balance between imagination and caution. The tribe understood that the unknown could not be fully defined before it revealed itself, and yet the human mind naturally sought patterns, narratives, and possibilities. The faces of the strangers were the first tangible evidence that such patterns might exist beyond the horizon. As the sun moved across the sky, light shifted and transformed the perception of the strangers' faces. Shadows deepened under brows, illuminating contours in ways that made expressions seem more dramatic, more expressive. The tribe interpreted these changes with instinctive precision. A flicker of sunlight on a cheek might suggest movement, attention, or emotion. A shadow across the eyes could indicate intention, concealment, or reflection. Every moment became a lesson in observation, a reminder that perception itself was an art, and that life depended as much on seeing and interpreting as on physical skill. Even minor details carried weight. The curve of lips, the narrowing of eyes, the tension in a hand resting on a strange tool, all were scrutinized. The tribe had learned that danger often presented itself in subtle ways, and that communication often preceded conflict or alliance. In the faces of these strangers, there were traces of intelligence and culture, hints of history and knowledge beyond anything known to the tribe. Each micro-expression became a thread in an intricate tapestry, revealing aspects of character and intention even as many questions remained unanswered. Children, though shielded, continued to observe, their interpretations blending with imagination. They noticed differences in movement, in facial shapes, in gestures that seemed ritualized or patterned. Stories would be told later, drawing from these fleeting observations, translating them into narrative forms that reinforced learning and memory. This was how culture and knowledge were transmitted, through attention, reflection, and imaginative reconstruction of observed reality. Even the youngest were participating in a complex web of human understanding that transcended age or experience. The elders recognized that this moment, the direct observation of unfamiliar faces, was historically profound. The tribe was not merely witnessing strangers, they were engaging with the unknown in a way that would echo through memory and narrative. Future generations would speak of the shapes and expressions glimpsed that day, not as isolated observations, but as markers of curiosity, intelligence, and the profound challenge of comprehending the foreign. The faces of the strangers were not just physical, they were symbolic, embodying the broader mystery of the world beyond the tribe's known experience. The strangers' faces, in their variety, hinted at complexity beyond immediate perception. Subtle differences in size, proportion, and expression suggested roles, relationships, and hierarchy. Some faces bore marks of experience, perhaps travel or labor, others seemed untouched, youthful, or inexperienced. Together, they formed a tableau that communicated both individuality and unity, a living demonstration of adaptation, intelligence, and intentionality. The tribe's eyes absorbed these subtleties, storing them not only for immediate survival but as lessons in human diversity and perception. As afternoon deepened toward evening, the tribe remained rooted in cautious observation. They understood that contact could come at any moment, and yet the act of watching itself was both protective and preparatory. The faces of the unknown, now fully discernible yet still enigmatic, invited reflection, on human capacity for empathy, on the boundaries of understanding, and on the profound complexity of life beyond one's own experience. Every expression, every glance, every micro-movement was a lesson, a story in waiting, a question posed by the universe itself. By the time shadows stretched long across the plains, the tribe had internalized much of what could be observed. They had learned to anticipate subtle gestures, to interpret hesitation and intent, to see patterns where none were obvious. The faces of the unknown were now etched into memory, not as mere shapes or features, but as a living map of perception, caution, curiosity, and understanding. In these faces, the tribe glimpsed not only strangers, but reflections of themselves, their instincts, and their capacity for observation and imagination. The tension that had simmered all day reached its peak as the strangers moved closer, breaking the distance that had kept observation safe and speculation alive. The tribe held their breath, instinctively aware that the first direct interaction could determine survival, trust, or disaster. Every muscle was coiled, every eye focused, every heartbeat synchronized in an unspoken rhythm of anticipation. The wind seemed to still, as if nature itself had paused to witness this unprecedented moment, the first true crossing of boundaries between the known and the unknown. For the tribe, this was not merely a physical encounter, it was an event loaded with symbolic weight. They had long prepared for threats, for hunting, and for the unpredictability of nature. But now, faced with beings who were like themselves yet entirely foreign, the rules of survival were no longer solely about speed, strength, or cunning. The encounter demanded emotional intelligence, careful observation, and the delicate balance of courage and restraint. Elders signaled subtly to hunters and gatherers alike, "Remain calm, do not rush, observe first." The strangers, for their part, moved with deliberate care, as though aware of the tension their presence had created. Some paused, lowering their tools, lifting hands in gestures that seemed both tentative and intentional. They were observing, as much as they were being observed. The tribe's elders interpreted these subtle movements with keen attention, recognizing patterns of approach, restraint, and evaluation. A slow step forward, a deliberate tilt of the head, or a brief pause could signify curiosity, caution, or a preliminary form of communication. In this intricate dance of perception, both groups were engaged in mutual discovery, a silent negotiation that would shape the outcome of the encounter. Children clung to their guardians, wide-eyed and quiet, sensing the gravity of the moment even if they could not comprehend it fully. The elders whispered guidance, sometimes silently, sometimes in hushed tones: "Do not provoke, do not retreat too hastily, do not display fear in ways that could invite aggression." Every gesture, every micro-expression, every step was laden with meaning. The tribe was learning, in real time, how to interpret and respond to beings whose presence challenged their deepest assumptions about the world. As the distance closed to mere meters, the first deliberate gestures of interaction appeared. One stranger extended a hand, palm open, fingers spread in a sign that seemed to convey peace. The elders interpreted this carefully. The movement was neither threatening nor overly aggressive, and it mirrored instinctive human gestures of openness and submission. The tribe's hunters relaxed slightly, though the tension remained, a reminder that first contact was as much about perception as it was about action. Even the slightest misstep could escalate fear into conflict. The tribe responded cautiously. A few elders stepped slightly forward, signaling with gentle hand movements that they were observing, acknowledging the strangers without committing to physical engagement. Others mirrored these gestures in subtle ways, maintaining readiness without provoking hostility. The balance of curiosity and caution was a delicate choreography, a reflection of survival instincts tempered by intelligence and social cohesion. The first contact was as much psychological as physical, a negotiation of trust, threat, and understanding. The strangers, sensing the cautious reception, paused once more. Their faces were expressive but inscrutable, showing curiosity, calculation, and perhaps even wonder. The tribe, in turn, studied each expression with precision, looking for clues about intent and emotion. Even minor movements, a raised brow, a slight nod, the angle of the shoulders, were analyzed for meaning. Communication at this stage was silent, built from observation, intuition, and the instinctive ability to interpret subtle signals. Both groups were engaged in a complex interplay of perception, a meeting of minds without words. Slowly, the first verbal sounds emerged. The strangers spoke in tones completely unfamiliar to the tribe, their words carrying cadence, rhythm, and emphasis that conveyed meaning even without comprehension. The tribe listened intently, noting patterns in pitch, volume, and repetition. Elders guided younger members to observe rather than react, emphasizing the importance of learning before judgment. Even the children, though unable to understand, absorbed the tones, the pauses, and the energy, internalizing the auditory cues as part of a larger map of comprehension. Physical proximity increased cautiously. A stranger crouched slightly, lowering the body to signal non-aggression. The tribe responded by mirroring the posture, a subtle exchange of respect encoded in body language. This mirrored movement was instinctive, a shared understanding rooted in millennia of human interaction. Safety is conveyed through posture, aggression through rigidity, curiosity through stillness. Each small adjustment carried enormous significance. The first contact was a negotiation of space, intent, and trust, and every gesture was weighed with acute awareness. Objects were introduced into the interaction. One stranger offered a small item, smooth, round, and unlike anything the tribe had encountered. The elders considered its presentation carefully. Was it a gift, a test, or a tool? They approached slowly, eyes fixed on the object, hands ready to withdraw if threatened. A younger member whispered a speculation: "It is not a weapon. It is not a threat." The tribe's collective attention shifted toward the item, understanding that tangible objects could convey intention more clearly than gestures alone. The exchange became a bridge between the unknown and the familiar, a physical anchor in a sea of uncertainty. The item was accepted tentatively. Fingers brushed briefly, a contact so delicate it could have been missed, yet it spoke volumes. The tribe noted the weight, texture, and unfamiliarity, interpreting these details as lessons in observation and caution. The strangers observed in turn, noting reactions, expressions, and gestures with equal attention. In this moment, trust began to form, not fully, not irrevocably, but enough to allow the next steps in engagement. The first contact had moved from observation to subtle interaction, a milestone that would echo in memory for generations. Emotion, subtle but pervasive, permeated the scene. Curiosity, wonder, fear, and excitement swirled together, creating a charged atmosphere. The tribe felt the significance of shared humanity across difference, that intelligence, observation, and intention were universal, even when expressed through unfamiliar forms. The strangers, too, seemed to recognize the uniqueness of this encounter, pausing to allow space for the tribe to adjust, respond, and engage. The moment was both fragile and monumental, a testament to the capacity for human beings to navigate the unknown with patience, insight, and respect. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, golden shadows across the plains, the first contact solidified into a rhythm. Movements became slightly more confident, gestures more deliberate, and the exchange of observation more nuanced. The tribe had crossed a threshold, from distant observation to tentative interaction, from speculation to engagement. Every eye, every gesture, every object exchanged contributed to a growing understanding that these strangers were not invaders or predators, they were participants in a shared moment of discovery, witnesses to the unfolding of history. The cinematic tension of the day was tempered by subtle rituals of reassurance. Elders guided younger members in posture, gaze, and proximity, ensuring that engagement remained safe and deliberate. The strangers mirrored these efforts, creating a shared choreography of mutual respect and careful exploration. It was a dance of perception, learning, and adaptation, illustrating the universality of human instinct when faced with the unfamiliar. The first contact, in all its suspense, had become a conduit for connection, understanding, and the beginnings of trust. By the time twilight approached, the tribe had absorbed the first lessons of engagement. Observation had given way to interaction, curiosity had met caution, and fear had been tempered by reflection. The first contact was not merely a meeting, it was an initiation into a new reality, a recognition that the world was larger, stranger, and richer than previously imagined. Faces, gestures, and small exchanges of objects had become threads in a narrative that would be told for generations, a story of the day when strangers crossed the horizon and human awareness expanded in response. As twilight deepened and the first contact settled into a cautious rhythm, a new current began to run through the tribe, a subtle, pervasive echo of fear. It was not the sharp, immediate panic of threat, but a quieter, more reflective apprehension. The mind and body responded in anticipation, sensing potential danger even in the absence of overt aggression. Fear, the elders understood, was as much a teacher as it was a warning. It sharpened perception, demanded attention, and reminded the tribe of the delicate balance between curiosity and caution. The younger hunters felt it most acutely, a tightening of the chest, a heightened awareness of every movement, every sound, every shadow. Their eyes flicked repeatedly to the strangers, searching for signs of hostility or vulnerability. Every gesture, however small, became a possible clue, a hand brushing against a tool, a pause in movement, the subtle shift of weight from one foot to another. The mind raced to interpret, anticipate, and prepare. Even as the adults guided them toward patience, the echoes of fear resonated in every fiber of their bodies, a reminder that survival depended on both vigilance and discernment. Elders interpreted these reactions with calm intensity. They understood that fear was both rational and instinctive, a response to uncertainty that could either protect or paralyze. In subtle gestures, they communicated reassurance while maintaining readiness, a gentle touch on a shoulder, a shift in stance, a slow, deliberate breath that signaled composure. The tribe's collective awareness became a network, each individual's fear moderated by the guidance and observation of those more experienced. In this way, the echoes of fear were transformed from paralyzing anxiety into a tool of preparation, attunement, and shared vigilance. Nature itself seemed to echo the tribe's apprehension. Birds, usually active at dusk, remained unusually quiet, their calls sharp but infrequent. Small mammals moved cautiously, pausing to listen before darting across underbrush. Even the river, reflecting the fading light, carried a subtle tension, its surface disturbed by unseen currents that seemed almost to mirror human anxiety. The forest was alive, attuned to the presence of the strangers, reinforcing the tribe's heightened awareness and amplifying the emotional resonance of fear. It was a shared environment, participating silently in the narrative of human caution and curiosity. The strangers, sensing the tribe's apprehension, adjusted their movements with increasing deliberation. Their gestures became slower, more measured, and their expressions more open, as if to signal non-aggression. This interplay of observation and response created a subtle dialogue. Fear elicited caution, caution elicited reassurance, and reassurance slowly eased tension without eliminating it entirely. The tribe understood, instinctively, that fear must be respected and managed. It was a signal of awareness, not an invitation to rash action. Children, still captivated by the unfolding scene, began to whisper among themselves, expressing a mix of awe and worry. "They will take something from us," one said, voice trembling. "Or maybe they will teach us," whispered another. The elders encouraged reflection rather than reaction, demonstrating that fear could be transformed into observation and learning. Even at this early age, the young were absorbing a vital lesson, that human emotion, particularly fear, could guide action without dominating it, shaping both understanding and behavior in moments of unprecedented uncertainty. The echoes of fear also manifested in physical readiness. Hunters subtly adjusted their grip on spears, shifting weight to allow rapid movement if necessary. Gatherers positioned themselves strategically, keeping both tools and children within reach. Every individual in the tribe became a node in a network of vigilance, responding to cues from the environment, the strangers, and each other. Fear, far from chaotic, became structured, disciplined, and purposeful, a living, dynamic part of the tribe's collective cognition. The elders reflected on the philosophical dimensions of this fear. It was a reminder of humanity's inherent vulnerability, the fragility of life, and the limits of knowledge. The arrival of the strangers had shattered the familiar rhythm of daily existence, revealing that the world was broader, stranger, and more unpredictable than the tribe had previously imagined. Fear was the natural response to such revelation, an emotional compass pointing toward caution, respect, and attentive awareness. And yet, it also inspired reflection on the courage required to engage with the unknown, a duality that had defined human experience since time immemorial. As darkness crept over the plains, shadows deepening and blending with the approaching night, the echoes of fear intensified. Sounds carried differently in the still air, a distant rustle, a bird call, or the whisper of leaves could trigger heightened attention. Each member of the tribe became more attuned to minute details, their senses sharpened by both instinct and learned experience. The strangers, still at the edge of observation, mirrored this tension with measured patience. The encounter had evolved into a silent negotiation, one of awareness, restraint, and subtle communication, where fear was both acknowledged and modulated. In this environment, imagination played a powerful role. The mind naturally filled gaps in perception with scenarios, both positive and negative. Could the strangers bring conflict? Knowledge? Aid? Danger? Every whisper of speculation amplified the echoes of fear, creating a psychological landscape where observation, caution, and reflection intertwined. Elders guided interpretation, reminding younger members to differentiate between actual signals and imagined threats. In doing so, they ensured that fear became a lens for understanding rather than a force for impulsive reaction. The nightfall brought an additional layer of tension. The fading light distorted shapes, deepened shadows, and heightened uncertainty. The stranger's features, now partially obscured by darkness, became even more enigmatic. The tribe relied on prior observation, memory, and instinct to interpret their movements, drawing on the lessons learned throughout the day. Fear, far from dissipating, was refined into discernment, sharpening attention and reinforcing the tribe's readiness to respond appropriately. Every step, glance, and subtle gesture was measured, ensuring that the encounter remained controlled and that trust could be built cautiously. The next morning brought a new awareness. The strangers were no longer distant shapes on the horizon but living presences within the tribe's shared environment. The forest, river, and plains, once familiar, predictable, and intimately mapped, suddenly seemed larger, layered with new possibility and risk. The tribe moved carefully, negotiating territory that had always been theirs, now subtly shared with beings whose intentions and needs were only partially understood. Every step, every glance, became a negotiation, a delicate assertion of presence and respect. Elders guided the movements of the tribe, ensuring that interaction remained safe and deliberate. Paths that had long been traversed freely now carried a new weight. Hunters, gatherers, and children alike observed boundaries, both natural and social, adjusting behavior with subtle precision. The strangers, in turn, respected certain unspoken rules. They did not overstep, did not seize, and moved with cautious deliberation. This mutual awareness created a fragile ecosystem of coexistence, one in which perception, interpretation, and spatial intelligence were as vital as physical skill. The concept of shared spaces extended beyond mere geography. Each individual began to perceive the environment through multiple lenses: the practical, where to gather food, where to rest safely; the social, how to interact without provocation; and the philosophical, how to understand the presence of the unknown within the familiar. The horizon, once a distant line, had become a boundary within the world itself, marking zones of interaction, observation, and reflection. The tribe's relationship to space had evolved from simple ownership to shared experience, revealing that territory could carry both practical and emotional significance. Children explored cautiously, learning by observing the interplay between adults and strangers. A small group crouched near the riverbank, fascinated by the way the newcomers examined stones, water, and foliage. They noticed gestures of attention and subtle patterns in movement, absorbing lessons in perception and respect for both objects and living beings. These early observations, though silent and unstructured, laid the foundation for understanding behavior, intention, and the art of coexistence. Even play became a tool of learning, integrating curiosity with caution, imagination with observation. Hunters, guided by elders, observed the stranger's use of the environment with acute attention. Tools were handled, paths chosen, and objects manipulated in ways that conveyed experience, skill, and intention. These small but meaningful actions revealed the stranger's understanding of the world and their adaptability within it. The tribe interpreted each gesture carefully: a hand brushing leaves aside, a foot placed deliberately on uneven ground, the angle at which a tool was held, all carried lessons in spatial intelligence, problem-solving, and awareness. Observation became an interactive study of behavior, as much as a precautionary measure. Shared spaces also prompted reflection on human adaptability. The tribe realized that coexistence required more than vigilance; it demanded flexibility, empathy, and a willingness to adjust routines. Traditional paths for gathering or hunting might be shared or modified to avoid interference. Areas for rest or assembly became negotiated zones, where the presence of strangers required subtle compromises. In navigating these spaces, the tribe was learning a broader principle, that cooperation, observation, and respect can transform potential conflict into coexistence, and that human awareness is most effective when it integrates multiple perspectives simultaneously. The strangers, too, adapted to the shared environment. They avoided aggressive intrusion, observed patterns, and seemed to learn quickly from the tribe's behavior. There was an unspoken rhythm to their movement, a recognition that survival and understanding depended on attention, respect, and adaptability. Even small gestures, stepping around a sleeping animal, pausing before crossing a path, or crouching to examine plants, signaled a conscious effort to engage with the environment without disruption. The tribe observed these interactions closely, noting patterns, intentions, and strategies, absorbing subtle lessons in coexistence and empathy. Social structures became evident within shared spaces. Elders mediated attention, guiding not only hunters and gatherers but also children in the ways of observation, restraint, and careful interaction. The strangers, by contrast, displayed behaviors that suggested roles, hierarchy, and communication, revealing a parallel social structure that the tribe could interpret only partially. By observing these dynamics, the tribe began to understand that shared spaces are not merely physical, they are also social landscapes, shaped by awareness, interaction, and negotiation. Every step, glance, and gesture contributes to the invisible architecture of coexistence. Philosophically, the notion of shared spaces illuminated a new dimension of human experience. Territory, once seen as static and absolute, revealed itself as fluid, relational, and responsive. Awareness of others, their needs, intentions, and boundaries, became as important as mastery of the environment itself. The tribe discovered that adaptation, attentiveness, and flexibility were as vital to survival as tools, strength, or knowledge of hunting and gathering. The stranger's presence transformed space into a living lesson in perception, negotiation, and ethical engagement with the world and its inhabitants. The natural environment reflected these changes. Animals responded to the new dynamics, adjusting movements and behaviors. Birds shifted flight patterns, small mammals avoided shared zones, and the riverbank echoed with the careful steps of cautious observers. Even inanimate objects, rocks, trees, and streams, acquired new significance, forming boundaries, reference points, and tools within the emergent system of shared space. The tribe learned to read these signals, integrating environmental cues with social observation to navigate safely and meaningfully. Interaction with shared spaces also nurtured reflection and emotional awareness. The tribe experienced a mixture of wonder, respect, and apprehension, emotions heightened by the novelty and complexity of the encounter. Shared space demanded patience, empathy, and acute attention, qualities that shaped not only physical behavior but social cohesion and cultural understanding. The very act of moving together in proximity to the strangers became an exercise in trust, perception, and collective learning, a meditation on coexistence as both practical necessity and philosophical principle. By mid-afternoon, routines began to emerge. Paths were established, zones of observation marked, and moments of cautious interaction integrated into daily life. The tribe and the strangers moved within these shared spaces without collision, each participant attuned to the presence, needs, and intentions of the other. Objects were observed, tools were tested, and minor exchanges occurred, all within a framework of careful negotiation. The landscape itself became a living classroom, teaching lessons about attention, adaptability, and relational awareness. The day concluded with a profound awareness of interdependence. The tribe realized that shared spaces are not static, they are dynamic arenas where perception, intention, and action converge. Survival depended on understanding others, respecting boundaries, and maintaining balance between caution and curiosity. The stranger's presence amplified this awareness, serving as both challenge and opportunity, expanding the cognitive and emotional landscape of the tribe. By navigating shared spaces effectively, the tribe demonstrated the capacity for adaptation, insight, and ethical engagement, principles that would resonate through memory and narrative for generations. As the sun set and shadows lengthened, the tribe gathered near familiar resting places, reflecting quietly on the day's lessons. Shared spaces had become a new framework for understanding both the world and themselves. Observation, patience, and reflection were now as critical as hunting skills or knowledge of terrain. The strangers, by participating with care and attentiveness, had reinforced the notion that coexistence requires empathy, adaptability, and respect for boundaries. In this quiet, reflective moment, the tribe felt the subtle expansion of their understanding, a philosophical awakening embedded in the rhythms of daily life and the careful negotiation of presence, territory, and interaction. With the establishment of shared spaces came a new rhythm to life, the quiet, deliberate rituals of observation. The tribe began to structure their attention, transforming instinctive vigilance into intentional practice. Every morning, before the first rays of sunlight touched the forest floor, elders would guide hunters, gatherers, and children in the art of careful watching. These rituals were not formal ceremonies in the sense of celebration, they were disciplined exercises in perception, awareness, and reflection, honed by generations of survival yet now infused with the novelty of the stranger's presence. Observation became both protective and educational. Scouts would move silently along the edges of the territory, noting subtle changes in the environment and the behavior of the strangers. The rhythm of leaves, the bending of grasses under weight, the pattern of shadows on rocks, all became part of a growing catalogue of cues. Elders emphasized that every detail mattered, a pause in movement could signal hesitation, a glance sideways could indicate awareness, a subtle shift of posture could reveal intention. These rituals transformed observation from mere survival instinct into a methodical, almost meditative study of life unfolding around them. Children participated under careful guidance. They learned to imitate, to anticipate, to notice what others might overlook. A small hand pointing to a glint of metal, a whispered recognition of a gesture, or a quiet mimicry of posture, all became lessons embedded in memory. The elders encouraged reflection, asking questions without requiring answers. Why did they pause there? What does that gesture mean? Through this process, observation became a dialogue between generations, a transfer of both knowledge and emotional intelligence. The act of watching was not passive, it was active learning, preparation, and adaptation rolled into one. The strangers, unaware or perhaps accepting of this scrutiny, moved through the environment with a rhythm of their own. Their gestures were deliberate, measured, and occasionally exploratory, providing subtle lessons for the tribe. Observing how the strangers interacted with tools, terrain, and each other offered invaluable insight. A foot carefully placed on uneven ground, a hand delicately manipulating an object, a glance exchanged across distance, all became data points in the tribe's silent analysis. These rituals of observation allowed the tribe to map patterns of behavior, anticipate potential movements, and develop an early framework for understanding foreign intention. Social dynamics within the tribe shifted subtly under the influence of these rituals. Elders mediated observation not only as a practical skill but also as a social exercise. Hunters learned restraint, children learned focus, and gatherers became more attuned to subtle cues of danger or opportunity. Observation became a shared practice, a collective rhythm that aligned the tribe's awareness. Every member participated in this silent choreography, ensuring that attention was maintained across the group and that insight could be distributed effectively. The strangers, by acting as catalysts, transformed everyday vigilance into a communal art. Philosophically, the rituals of observation illuminated the tribe's understanding of time, perception, and anticipation. Attention was no longer linear or reactive, it became cyclical and anticipatory. Moments of pause, reflection, and repeated study were as critical as immediate response. The tribe learned to synchronize perception with action, integrating multiple perspectives into a cohesive understanding of their environment. Each ritual reinforced a fundamental truth, that awareness itself is a tool, and that observation, patience, and interpretation are as vital to survival and growth as physical strength or tool mastery. Observation also became a mechanism for understanding complexity. The stranger's behaviors, unpredictable yet patterned, revealed layers of intention, skill, and adaptation. By watching and reflecting, the tribe began to decode subtleties that would otherwise have gone unnoticed, differences in approach, the hierarchy implied in movement, and the unspoken coordination within the stranger's group. This process was not merely practical, it cultivated insight, curiosity, and a nascent form of empathy. To observe carefully is to imagine the world from another perspective, to hypothesize about thought, intention, and feeling. The tribe was learning not just to watch but to think through observation, a skill that would have enduring implications for culture, storytelling, and collective intelligence. These rituals were interspersed with periods of storytelling. In the evenings, the tribe gathered to recount the day's observations, translating gestures and actions into narrative form. Children's comments, often imaginative and speculative, were woven into the elders' analysis. They pause near the water, as if they understand its secret, one child might say. Their hands move like the wind, an elder could add. This fusion of observation and interpretation reinforced memory, nurtured understanding, and created a collective sense of the stranger's presence, intentions, and patterns. Ritual became narrative, and narrative became a tool for refining awareness and emotional intelligence. Fear, still present, was integrated into these rituals. Observing potential danger without succumbing to panic was an essential skill. Elders guided the tribe in distinguishing between genuine threat and benign unfamiliarity. The stranger's presence was both fascinating and unsettling, requiring discipline, patience, and reflection. Rituals of observation provided a structured framework for managing these emotions, channeling fear into awareness rather than impulsive reaction. Through repeated practice, vigilance became a meditative state, blending emotion, intellect, and instinct into a unified approach to the unknown. Environmental observation was equally central. The tribe watched not only the strangers but also the forest, river, and plains, noting subtle changes influenced by these new presences. Animal behavior, plant patterns, and even the movement of water became part of a comprehensive map of shared space. By connecting the stranger's actions with environmental cues, the tribe learned to anticipate change, predict interaction, and understand the interplay of multiple factors within their world. Observation was not isolated, it was holistic, integrating social, environmental, and philosophical dimensions into a cohesive practice. Through these repeated rituals, a subtle bond began to form. The strangers, though not fully understood, were acknowledged as participants in a shared narrative. The act of careful observation became an unspoken dialogue, a negotiation of attention, space, and understanding. Trust was not instantaneous but cultivated through rhythm, reflection, and consistency. Each day, each movement, each gesture observed contributed to a growing awareness that coexistence was possible, that engagement could be safe, and that learning required patience and meticulous attention. By the end of the section, the tribe had transformed their vigilance into a structured, reflective practice. Observation had become ritualized, woven into the rhythm of daily life. Each member of the tribe, from children to elders, participated in the ongoing dance of attention, learning, and interpretation. The strangers had become catalysts for an evolutionary leap in awareness, teaching the tribe that survival is not solely physical but cognitive and emotional as well. These rituals would endure, shaping cultural memory, collective intelligence, and the philosophical understanding of the human capacity to engage with the unknown. As days unfolded within the shared spaces, the tribe began to notice the subtle language of gesture employed by the strangers. Words, sounds, and speech were largely unintelligible, but every movement carried meaning: a tilt of the head, a shift in stance, the extension of a hand, or the manner in which an object was held, all communicated intention, curiosity, or caution. For the tribe, Already attuned to silent signals in hunting, play, and ritual, this nonverbal language became a profound tool for understanding the unknown. Elders guided interpretation, emphasizing patience and careful observation. Notice the pause, one would whisper, and the way their hands move before they act. Hunters mirrored these motions silently, practicing subtle shifts in posture and gesture themselves, attempting to create a bridge of comprehension. Even small children, previously more impulsive in curiosity, began to mimic and interpret, absorbing an entirely new form of communication through instinct, imitation, and reflection. In this process, gesture became not merely informative but connective, allowing dialogue across the barrier of unfamiliar sound and language. The stranger's gestures were deliberate, often ritualized, and sometimes playful. They pointed at objects, demonstrating curiosity or questioning purpose. A hand extended slowly, fingers spread, indicated openness, while a hand raised or held close to the chest signaled hesitation. The tribe began to catalog these gestures, associating each with possible meaning, emotional tone, or intention. Observation of repetition, context, and subtle variation enabled interpretation. A single motion might convey curiosity one moment, and caution the next, depending on accompanying posture, gaze, or speed. The human capacity to discern such nuance became an essential survival skill in this encounter. Children were the most eager participants, learning through play and mimicry. A child might extend a stick to point at a stone, echoing the stranger's gesture, or crouch and watch intently as elders signaled direction with hands. In doing so, they internalized lessons about intention, attention, and subtle communication. Observation and imitation became intertwined, forming a cognitive loop in which gesture was both learned and creatively interpreted. This early skill building laid the foundation for complex social understanding and cultural memory, teaching that communication is not solely verbal but deeply embodied. The elders, recognizing the depth of this nonverbal language, incorporated reflection and dialogue into daily routines. During periods of rest or gathering, they would recount observed gestures, discuss possible meanings, and explore the implications for interaction. Stories were woven around actions. When they crouch near the water, they study the stones, not to harm but to learn. When their hands are open and still, they are showing peace. These interpretations were provisional, subject to revision as further observation revealed nuance, but they anchored understanding, turning fleeting movements into meaningful narrative. Gesture also served as a bridge between curiosity and caution. When a stranger approached a gathering point, a subtle tilt of the head or a lowered hand could communicate intention without words. The tribe responded with mirrored gestures, raising hands, adjusting posture, or shifting weight, to signal awareness, respect, or readiness. Each interaction reinforced the rhythm of nonverbal dialogue, creating a feedback loop in which gesture guided perception, action, and understanding simultaneously. The language of gesture became a living, dynamic system, both practical and deeply symbolic. The natural environment itself framed this dialogue. Shadows, light, and terrain affected how gestures were perceived, emphasizing or obscuring movement. A hand raised against the sun cast a dramatic silhouette, a crouched posture among tall grasses suggested stealth or focus. The tribe learned to integrate these environmental cues with the gestures themselves, enhancing comprehension and predicting possible actions. Observation became a holistic practice, blending human behavior, spatial awareness, and environmental context into a seamless understanding of interaction. Social dynamics within the tribe were also influenced. Elders mediated the interpretation of gestures, guiding children and younger hunters in attention, reflection, and cautious engagement. The act of watching, analyzing, and responding became a collective endeavor, reinforcing cohesion and shared awareness. The strangers, through their subtle but consistent use of gesture, inadvertently taught the tribe principles of attentiveness, patience, and respect for both space and action. This mutual learning transformed the encounter from mere observation to a shared cognitive experience, where meaning was negotiated silently across cultures and species of thought. Fear and caution remained intertwined with gesture, yet were tempered by understanding. The tribe learned to recognize signs of potential threat or discomfort, such as a sudden retraction of a hand or a shift in stance, and to respond without panic. Gesture allowed preemptive understanding, mitigating risk while fostering engagement. At the same time, gestures of openness, an extended hand, a lowered posture, or deliberate stillness, encouraged trust and curiosity. The language of gesture was, therefore, both defensive and connective, balancing fear and engagement with subtle, embodied intelligence. Children's imaginative interpretation played a unique role. A small child might perceive a gesture as playful mimicry, another as a form of challenge, another as a silent question. These subjective readings were encouraged, discussed, and refined by elders, fostering cognitive flexibility and teaching that meaning is often context-dependent. By integrating imaginative interpretation with careful observation, the tribe developed a nuanced understanding that nonverbal communication is multilayered, dynamic, and fundamentally relational. As observation and gestures became more fluent, the first tangible exchanges began, small gifts and tokens, silent bridges between worlds. These items, stones, feathers, carved wood, or simple tools, were offered cautiously, each movement deliberate, each placement measured. For the tribe, accustomed to the rhythms of nature and the pragmatic use of objects, these gifts carried a profound new significance. They were more than material, they were gestures of connection, curiosity, and trust, physical representations of intention. The first token appeared unexpectedly. A stranger crouched, holding a smooth, rounded stone, glinting slightly in the sunlight. Hand extended, the offering was tentative, cautious, yet deliberate. The elders signaled to the tribe to approach slowly, observing posture, gaze, and breath. Every detail mattered, the stranger's eyes, the angle of the wrist, the placement of fingers, all indicated peaceful intent. The tribe, in turn, approached with a mixture of awe, caution, and curiosity, understanding that this single object could communicate more than words ever could. Children, wide-eyed, watched the exchange with fascination. "It is like a stone from the sky," whispered one. "Or a seed of friendship," another added. Elders smiled subtly, recognizing the poetry in these interpretations, while reinforcing caution. Observation, interpretation, and reflection were intertwined, teaching that gifts were not merely objects but vessels of meaning, embodying a dialogue of attention, intention, and reciprocity. The act of receiving a gift became a careful ritual in itself, hands extended slowly, touch deliberate, gaze steady, showing respect without haste. As more tokens were exchanged, the tribe began to discern patterns in their meaning. Some were playful, small, intricately shaped pieces that seemed intended to delight or intrigue. Others were practical, tools, implements, or objects demonstrating skill and understanding. Each item revealed a different layer of the stranger's intentions, offering clues about culture, experience, and priorities. Observation became a careful balancing act, to receive without offense, to interpret without assumption, and to respond with gestures that communicated recognition and gratitude. Elders guided younger members in these exchanges. A child might mimic the gesture of placing a small stone on the ground before picking up a token, reflecting learned patterns of respect and reciprocity. Hunters mirrored the act with subtle precision, adjusting stance, gaze, and posture to signal attentiveness rather than dominance. These small, repeated rituals reinforced social cohesion and collective awareness, demonstrating that the act of giving and receiving carries weight beyond the material. It is a negotiation of trust, attention, and relational intelligence. The stranger's selection of gifts was deliberate. Items were chosen for visibility, interest, or symbolic significance. A feather, held lightly between fingers, indicated delicacy and thought. A smooth stone suggested patience and skill. Each selection communicated attention to the environment and awareness of the tribe's perception. The act of offering became a silent negotiation. Objects were not imposed but extended, leaving space for interpretation, reflection, and choice. The tribe quickly understood that the meaning of the gift lay as much in its presentation as in the item itself. Observation remained central. Every micro-movement, the angle of the hand, the pause before release, the orientation of the wrist, was analyzed and reflected upon. Elders encouraged discussion and speculation. Why this object? Why in this manner? What might it signify about intention or relationship? Through these conversations, the tribe transformed material exchange into cognitive and emotional lessons, learning not only about the stranger's culture but about principles of attention, empathy, and symbolic communication. Gifts became conduits for learning, curiosity, and trust-building. The emotional dimension was equally profound. Tokens invoked wonder, delight, and reflection. Children delighted in tactile and visual novelty, handling feathers, stones, and carved pieces with reverent curiosity. Adults felt the gravity of intention embedded in each offering, sensing the stranger's careful attention and the subtle message of goodwill. Fear, though still present, was modulated by these acts of intentionality. Gifts served as reassurance, demonstrating a willingness to engage, communicate, and participate in a shared world. Reciprocity soon emerged. The tribe began to respond with items of their own, polished stones, woven fibers, or small carvings. These offerings were placed with equal care, mirroring the gestures observed from the strangers. Attention to posture, gaze, and timing ensured that each exchange was respectful and understood. The act of giving back reinforced mutual recognition, creating a rhythm of trust and attentiveness. Each token, though small, represented a layer of social negotiation, connecting intention, perception, and relationship in a tangible, physical form. Children quickly internalized these lessons. Play became intertwined with learning, arranging objects, mimicking gestures, and experimenting with placement. Even without full comprehension of symbolism, the youngest members absorbed patterns of respect, reflection, and careful interaction. Elders observed these interactions with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that these early experiences were shaping both cognitive flexibility and relational intelligence. The rituals surrounding gifts were cultivating skills far beyond the immediate encounter: attention, empathy, patience, and interpretive reasoning. The natural environment played a role in framing these exchanges. Light, shadow, and terrain affected perception, emphasizing or concealing gestures and objects. A token placed in sunlight glinted dramatically, drawing attention and highlighting intention. One placed in shadow suggested subtlety or discretion. The tribe learned to read these contextual cues, integrating environmental awareness with social observation. Gifts became more than objects, they became elements of a dynamic landscape of interaction, requiring simultaneous attention to multiple layers of meaning. Philosophically, the exchanges of gifts and tokens revealed profound insights about human interaction. Objects, though material, can carry intention, emotion, and social meaning. Attention, observation, and careful reflection transform simple items into bridges between minds, cultures, and worlds. The tribe realized that engagement with the unknown could be guided not only through caution and observation but also through the deliberate creation of meaning and the sharing of objects imbued with attention. Gifts were, in essence, silent language, conveying connection, intention, and trust. By the end of the section, the rhythm of exchange had become integrated into the tribe's routines. Observation, interpretation, and reciprocity created a delicate network of trust and communication. The strangers and the tribe participated in a growing, shared understanding. Gestures, tokens, and attention together created a dialogue that transcended spoken language. Each day's interaction expanded not only awareness but also emotional intelligence, social cohesion, and cognitive sophistication. Gifts and tokens became symbolic anchors, reminding both groups that the unknown can be approached with curiosity, respect, and intentionality, and that human connection often begins with the smallest, most deliberate of gestures. With the ongoing exchange of gestures, observation, and tokens, the tribe began to notice something remarkable: the patterns of behavior exhibited by the strangers. Each movement, each pause, each subtle repetition revealed underlying logic, intention, and rhythm. What initially appeared unpredictable now carried discernible structure. The elders recognized that these patterns were the key to understanding not just individual actions, but the broader framework of the stranger's cognition, social behavior, and interaction with the environment. The process of learning these patterns began slowly, almost imperceptibly. Observers noted repeated sequences, a crouch followed by a gesture to an object, a hand extended before touching the ground, a glance exchanged between strangers prior to movement. Each repetition became a clue, and over time, clusters of gestures, postures, and behaviors emerged as predictable sequences. The tribe's attention sharpened, observation moved from passive witnessing to active hypothesis, each individual attempting to anticipate what might come next based on previous patterns. Children, especially, were fascinated by repetition. They watched keenly as a stranger reached for a stone, examined its surface, then held it in the sunlight. "They always do this before they put it down," one child whispered. Elders encouraged this insight, nurturing the instinct to recognize causality and sequence. This exercise was not merely a game, it was training in anticipation, analytical observation, and relational reasoning. By internalizing these sequences, the tribe learned to navigate interactions with a blend of caution and understanding, transforming uncertainty into manageable expectation. The patterns extended beyond gesture to encompass environmental interaction. The strangers moved through the forest in deliberate ways, avoiding certain plants, stepping carefully over roots, and pausing near water. These choices suggested knowledge of terrain, observation of animal behavior, and a sense of spatial awareness that transcended instinct. The tribe, already intimately familiar with the land, began to compare their own patterns of movement and survival with those of the strangers. By observing similarities and differences, they expanded their cognitive map of the environment, integrating new strategies and insights into their own practices. Observation became increasingly methodical. Elders instructed groups to follow without interfering, to document, through memory and discussion, the sequence of gestures, movements, and actions. "Notice the pause before they pick up the object," an elder would say. "What does it tell you about attention and caution?" Each sequence was analyzed, tested, and reflected upon. The tribe's approach mirrored early scientific method, observation, pattern recognition, hypothesis, and reflection. They were learning not only about the strangers but about the universal principles of behavior, intention, and cognition. Patterns were not always obvious. Sometimes gestures varied subtly depending on context. A crouch near water indicated study, while a crouch near a tree suggested caution. A hand extended slowly could signal curiosity or inquiry, depending on accompanying gaze and posture. The tribe learned to attend to multiple factors simultaneously, integrating subtle cues into a cohesive understanding. This cognitive complexity enhanced their awareness, enabling them to predict behavior and respond appropriately, reducing risk and fostering trust. Social dynamics within the stranger group revealed additional patterns. Observing interactions between strangers, the exchange of gestures, tokens, and attention, taught the tribe about hierarchy, coordination, and cooperation. Certain gestures preceded joint action, others signaled submission, caution, or initiative. The tribe began to map these social sequences, recognizing that understanding relationships within the strangers group was as important as understanding individual actions. Social awareness became a crucial aspect of pattern recognition, reinforcing both vigilance and empathy. Children became adept at noticing subtle variations. A child might point out that when one stranger touches an object, another observes silently before reacting. Elders encouraged these insights, turning observation into discussion and reflection. Learning patterns became a collective exercise, each member contributed memory, attention, and interpretation, creating a shared cognitive map that enhanced both individual and group understanding. This early practice of pattern recognition strengthened analytical thinking, attention to detail, and relational intelligence in ways that extended far beyond immediate survival needs. The environment itself interacted with patterns. The stranger's movement influenced animal behavior, altered paths of travel, and even affected light and shadow. Observing these consequences, the tribe gained insight into cause and effect relationships, feedback loops, and environmental sensitivity. Patterns were not isolated, they were interconnected, spanning gestures, objects, social behavior, and the natural world. Learning to perceive and anticipate these interactions expanded the tribe's cognitive and emotional awareness, reinforcing the principle that understanding behavior requires holistic attention. Over time, patterns became predictive. The tribe could anticipate where a stranger would go, which objects they would examine, and which gestures would precede specific actions. This anticipation allowed for more confident, deliberate engagement, approaching shared spaces without unnecessary fear, offering tokens in meaningful sequences, or positioning themselves strategically to observe without intrusion. The patterns became a guide, a map of the unfamiliar, enabling adaptation without provocation. The emotional dimension of pattern recognition was profound. Recognition of predictability reduced fear and heightened curiosity, allowing the tribe to engage with strangers in ways that were both safe and meaningful. Understanding sequence and intention created a sense of mastery over uncertainty, reinforcing social cohesion and individual confidence. Observation was no longer merely defensive, it became a pathway to insight, trust, and philosophical reflection on the nature of action, intention, and human universality. The elders emphasized reflection alongside observation. Each evening, sequences were recounted, interpreted, and debated. Yesterday, they crouched near the water before placing the object, one might say. Today, they did the same, but paused longer, another observed. These discussions reinforced memory, analytical thinking, and collective learning. The tribe discovered that patterns were not only practical guides, they were narratives, forming the foundation of understanding, communication, and even cultural storytelling. Observing and interpreting patterns became a form of meditation, a reflective practice that integrated cognition, emotion, and social awareness. Patterns extended into subtle forms of play and experimentation. Children would mimic gestures, altering sequences to explore consequences, while adults would test predictions by offering tokens at specific moments. Through repetition, variation, and reflection, both tribe and strangers contributed to a growing, shared rhythm of interaction. These activities reinforced learning, anticipation, and adaptability, transforming the environment itself into a living classroom where observation, reflection, and experience converged. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, the tribe gathered around their fire, entering a period of nightfall reflections. The day's lessons, observations, and exchanges settled into their minds like sediment, quietly layering understanding, emotion, and insight. Night brought stillness, a pause in the rhythm of activity, offering space to internalize patterns, interpret gestures, and contemplate the profound implications of the stranger's presence. Firelight flickered across attentive faces, casting shadows that danced across the ground, echoing the movements observed earlier in the day. The elders, seated in their familiar positions, encouraged quiet conversation. "What did you notice today?" one asked, voice low but deliberate. Children and hunters alike spoke softly, recounting gestures, sequences, and small exchanges. Each reflection was layered with both factual observation and emotional resonance, the timing of a gesture, the subtle tilt of a head, the cautious extension of a hand, all now infused with meaning through careful attention. Children's interpretations were vivid, often imaginative, blending observed fact with conjecture. "When they put the stone on the ground, they are saying it belongs to the earth," whispered one child. Another suggested, "They are sharing secrets with us without words." Elders smiled subtly, recognizing the poetic insight within these reflections. Imagination, tempered by observation, became a bridge between comprehension and intuition. In this liminal space between day and night, fact and feeling converged, enhancing the tribe's understanding of both strangers and self. Reflection was not passive. The tribe considered consequences, patterns, and possibilities. Why had a gesture occurred at one moment but not another? What might a particular sequence of movement indicate about intention, hierarchy, or emotion? Even as the fire crackled, minds worked silently, integrating physical observation with abstract thought. Nightfall provided an opportunity to consolidate learning, linking discrete observations into broader narratives, and preparing the tribe to navigate uncertainty with both caution and insight. The physical environment reinforced reflection. The forest, now dark and hushed, magnified the sense of presence and awareness. The distant calls of nocturnal creatures, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the steady murmur of the river created a backdrop against which memories of the day resonated. Shadows elongated and merged, prompting careful attention to detail and imagination. Observing the interplay of light, sound, and movement, the tribe deepened their understanding of context, nuance, and environmental cues, reinforcing lessons learned from the stranger's patterns and gestures. Elders encouraged connections between observation and emotion. "Notice how you felt when they extended their hand," one said. "Curiosity, caution, perhaps a little fear. Each emotion teaches us something." By linking affective experience to perception, the tribe began to develop a sophisticated emotional literacy. Fear was acknowledged but not allowed to dominate, curiosity was encouraged but tempered by attention, wonder was celebrated as a tool for reflection. Nightfall reflections became a practice in balancing cognitive observation with emotional insight, cultivating mindfulness and self-awareness alongside practical understanding. Storytelling emerged naturally during this time. The day's events were recounted, gestures interpreted, and sequences narrated. Elders wove observation into narrative, shaping memory and understanding simultaneously. They crouched near the river before touching the stone, one might begin, followed by discussion of potential meaning and consequence. These stories were collaborative, integrating contributions from children, hunters, and gatherers alike. The process reinforced memory, clarified patterns, and nurtured collective intelligence, ensuring that lessons from the day would endure in the minds of all. The act of reflection also strengthened social cohesion. Sharing observations and interpretations required listening, patience, and respect. Each voice contributed to a communal understanding, creating a shared cognitive map of both the stranger's behavior and the tribe's environment. By articulating observations, negotiating interpretations, and integrating multiple perspectives, the tribe reinforced social bonds and trust, demonstrating that reflection is not solely an individual practice but a collective exercise in attention, learning, and relational awareness. Nightfall reflections deepened philosophical awareness. The tribe contemplated the nature of time, action, and intention. Patterns observed throughout the day suggested that behavior, though complex, was not random. Intentions could be inferred, sequences anticipated, and relational dynamics understood. This awareness prompted consideration of human universals: attention, interpretation, and communication are fundamental, transcending culture, species, and circumstance. The strangers, through their presence, gestures, and gifts, had become teachers in this philosophical dimension, offering insight into the structure's underlying interaction and the ethical engagement with the unknown. Children were guided to connect observation with imagination and prediction. "What might they do tomorrow?" an elder asked. Questions encouraged hypothesis, reflection, and anticipation, reinforcing the cognitive skills necessary for learning patterns and navigating uncertainty. Speculation was grounded in observation but allowed creativity to flourish, linking reason with imagination. Nightfall became a liminal space where empirical awareness and imaginative projection converged, fostering cognitive flexibility and relational intelligence. The emotional impact of reflection was profound. Memory of the day's exchanges brought both comfort and tension, balancing fascination with caution. Fear, curiosity, and wonder were integrated into coherent understanding. The tribe's emotional landscape was refined, their awareness heightened, and their capacity for attentive, deliberate response strengthened. Nightfall, in this sense, was a crucible of learning, a temporal space where experience, observation, and emotion fused to prepare the mind and body for future interaction. Environmental awareness continued to play a central role. As darkness deepened, the tribe noted how familiar sounds, smells, and textures were altered by presence and perception. The rustle of leaves, once background noise, now conveyed possibility and caution. Shadows hinted at movement, prompting recall of gestures and tokens from the day. The natural world was simultaneously context and teacher, amplifying lessons learned and reinforcing the integration of observation, anticipation, and reflection. Nightfall reflections, therefore, were both internal and external, a dialogue between mind, body, and environment. As the days passed and routines solidified, the tribe encountered moments that tested the fragile foundation of trust that had begun to form with the strangers. Trust, they realized, was not an automatic byproduct of observation or gestures. It was a delicate, negotiated phenomenon, requiring both patience and careful attention. The first subtle tests appeared in minor deviations of expected behavior, a stranger approaching too quickly, a token offered but hesitated upon, a gesture that seemed incomplete or ambiguous. Each event demanded deliberation, reflection, and measured response. The elders took the lead in interpreting these moments, guiding the tribe in careful assessment. "Notice the eyes, the breath, the small pauses," one said. "Trust is built in details." The tribe had learned to analyze sequences, gestures, and environmental context, but now they applied these skills to social and emotional evaluation. Could the stranger's actions be trusted? Were intentions aligned with gestures? Even small ambiguities carried weight, demanding a balance of caution and engagement. These tests were not merely social, they were cognitive, emotional, and philosophical, requiring integration of multiple layers of awareness. Children, as always, were active participants, though less burdened by fear. They noticed patterns and inconsistencies with remarkable clarity, sometimes observing subtleties that adults overlooked. "They looked at the stone and then at us before they picked it up," one child whispered. Elders nodded approvingly, recognizing that such observations could inform judgment, enhance prediction, and refine trust. Through this interplay of innocence and experience, the tribe developed a collective, nuanced approach to evaluating the strangers, blending instinct, observation, and reflection. The first significant test of trust occurred during a moment of shared resource gathering. A stranger reached for a cluster of berries near the tribe's children. Instinctively, the children hesitated, adults held back, watching closely. Yet the stranger paused, gestured gently, and selected only what was necessary, leaving the remainder untouched. Observers noted the deliberate care in movement, the rhythm of the hand, and the timing of the gesture. Trust, in this instance, was earned not through words but through deliberate action, attention to context, and adherence to unspoken principles of fairness and respect. Elders used these moments as teaching opportunities. "Trust is not blind," one explained. "It grows from observation, reflection, and careful judgment." The tribe began to see trust as dynamic, fluctuating with behavior, context, and interaction. Each action by the strangers could either strengthen or weaken trust, just as the tribe's own gestures, responses, and offerings influenced the relationship. The mutual dependency of trust became clear. It was a living, evolving process, requiring both parties to participate consciously and consistently. Observation of gestures and tokens remained central. Small, deliberate acts, pausing before placing an object, offering a token with attention, or acknowledging a mirrored gesture, reinforced reliability and predictability. Conversely, sudden movements, hesitation, or inconsistency prompted reflection and, at times, caution. The tribe learned to calibrate responses, balancing curiosity, engagement, and vigilance. Trust was not a binary state but a spectrum, continuously negotiated through action, perception, and interpretation. Children's imaginative interpretations played a role in understanding trust. A subtle gesture might be perceived as playful in one context and cautious in another. Elders encouraged discussion, using imagination to expand understanding while grounding conclusions in careful observation. This combination of reason and creativity allowed the tribe to anticipate potential actions, interpret intention, and navigate uncertainty with sophistication. The cultivation of trust, therefore, became both practical and cognitive, enhancing the tribe's relational intelligence. The natural environment influenced tests of trust as well. Shared spaces, resources, and environmental hazards created scenarios where observation and judgment were essential. Crossing a stream, gathering food, or navigating uneven terrain required awareness not only of strangers' movements but also of their reliability in response to environmental challenges. Could the stranger act predictably, respecting boundaries and shared safety? These moments were microcosms of the larger process of trust building, where survival, observation, and relational dynamics converged. A particularly striking instance occurred when the strangers intervened during a minor conflict among the tribe's younger members. A child reached for a token offered by a stranger, while another child tried to claim it simultaneously. The strangers, instead of reacting aggressively or ignoring the dispute, used deliberate gestures, a pause, an open hand, and careful placement to indicate fairness. The children mirrored these gestures, pausing and observing before acting. Elders noted the learning: trust can be demonstrated, reinforced, and negotiated through thoughtful action, even in moments of tension or uncertainty. Tests of trust were not limited to overt actions. Subtle cues, the alignment of gaze, rhythm of movement, and careful attention to response, communicated intention and reliability. The tribe became adept at reading these signs, discerning authenticity from hesitation, sincerity from uncertainty. Trust was constructed incrementally, with each interaction contributing to a layered understanding of reliability and mutual respect. The stranger's consistency in small, deliberate acts strengthened the bond, while deviations prompted careful reassessment, highlighting the fragile, dynamic nature of trust. Emotion played a critical role. Fear, curiosity, and anticipation intertwined with observation, shaping judgment. Moments of uncertainty evoked hesitation, moments of careful attention inspired confidence. The tribe learned to integrate emotional responses with cognitive analysis, balancing instinct with reflection. Trust became both rational and effective, a synthesis of what was seen, inferred, and felt. This holistic approach deepened relational understanding, enhancing both safety and engagement. Over time, patterns emerged in how trust was tested and demonstrated. Consistent gestures, deliberate attention to resources, careful interaction with children, and predictable sequences of action all contributed to the establishment of reliability. The tribe began to anticipate and interpret behavior, recognizing both explicit and implicit cues. Trust, though fragile, was increasingly resilient, grounded in observation, reflection, and repeated demonstration. These patterns informed not only interaction with strangers but also the tribe's internal dynamics, reinforcing social cohesion, empathy, and shared understanding. Children's play became an extension of these lessons. Mimicking gestures, offering tokens, and navigating shared spaces allowed them to experiment with trust, perception, and relational dynamics in a low-stakes environment. Elders observed these activities closely, guiding interpretation and reinforcing the principles underlying trust building. Through play, observation, and reflection, the youngest members internalized a complex understanding of relational intelligence, preparing them for future encounters and social negotiation. Philosophically, the concept of trust revealed profound truths about human interaction. Trust is neither granted nor static, it is earned, negotiated, and maintained through consistent, attentive action. Observing intention, anticipating consequences, and reflecting on patterns are essential for establishing reliability. The tribe understood that trust requires both vulnerability and vigilance, courage and patience, engagement and reflection. It is a living process, dependent on awareness, perception, and ethical attention to others. By the end of these early tests, the tribe had internalized a nuanced approach to trust. With trust gradually established and gestures interpreted with increasing sophistication, the tribe entered a new phase of interaction, the emergence of shared knowledge. Knowledge, once siloed within individuals or small groups, began to circulate freely, becoming a collective resource. The presence of the strangers catalyzed this process, revealing gaps, insights, and possibilities that had previously remained unexplored. Observation, imitation, and reflection transformed into a collaborative enterprise, and the tribe recognized that learning was no longer confined to survival, it was relational, adaptive, and expansive. The earliest manifestations of shared knowledge were subtle. Hunters and gatherers discussed patterns noticed during the day, debating the meaning of gestures, the significance of tokens, and the implications of environmental cues. Children added imaginative interpretations, and elders wove these into coherent narratives that highlighted both practical and philosophical lessons. By discussing, reflecting, and refining observations, the tribe began to construct a collective understanding of the stranger's behavior, intentions, and rhythms. Knowledge was no longer individual, it became communal, enriched by multiple perspectives and integrated into daily practice. Physical artifacts also played a role in consolidating shared knowledge. Tokens exchanged with the strangers, stones, feathers, carved wood, were not merely objects of fascination, they became repositories of information. Children and adults examined them repeatedly, noting patterns, associations, and sequences. A smooth stone might signify caution, a carved shape suggest curiosity, a feather imply playfulness. These tangible items allowed abstract lessons to be anchored in material reality, enabling memory, interpretation, and transmission across individuals. Each object carried layers of meaning, reinforcing the principle that knowledge can be embodied, relational, and symbolic. Observation of environmental patterns continued to inform collective learning. The strangers' movement through the forest, their interaction with plants, water, and terrain provided lessons in spatial awareness, resource management, and environmental adaptation. The tribe began to integrate these observations into practical strategies, selecting optimal paths, understanding animal behavior, predicting seasonal changes, and anticipating human and non-human interactions. Shared knowledge was grounded not only in social understanding but also in environmental literacy, connecting the microcosm of gestures and tokens to the macrocosm of survival, adaptation, and ecosystem awareness. Children became active participants in the circulation of knowledge. Play, mimicry, and experimentation allowed them to test hypotheses, explore consequences, and internalize patterns of behavior. Elders guided interpretation, ensuring that curiosity was structured by reflection and attention. Through these processes, the youngest members of the tribe learned not only observation and imitation but also critical thinking, anticipation, and relational intelligence. Shared knowledge became a multigenerational enterprise, linking memory, experience, and insight across age and expertise. The exchange of knowledge extended beyond observation to experimentation. Hunters tested sequences of action inferred from the strangers, replicating gestures, postures, and interactions with objects. Gatherers experimented with environmental cues, timing, and movement. Children and adolescents engaged in imaginative play that mirrored observed sequences, creating mini-experiments in relational, environmental, and cognitive understanding. These activities reinforced learning, allowing knowledge to move from abstract recognition to embodied skill, strengthening both practical competence and cognitive flexibility. Narrative became central to the consolidation of knowledge. Each evening, the tribe gathered to recount, interpret, and analyze the day's events. Stories were constructed around gestures, tokens, sequences, and environmental interactions, integrating observation with speculation, imagination, and philosophical reflection. Elders guided these discussions, emphasizing patterns, consequences, and the potential for learning. By translating observation into narrative, the tribe ensured that knowledge was not fleeting but anchored in memory, interpretation, and collective understanding. Storytelling transformed individual experience into communal insight. Shared knowledge also fostered social cohesion. By participating in observation, interpretation, and reflection, members of the tribe reinforced collective norms, attention, and trust. Knowledge became a social glue, binding individuals through shared understanding, responsibility, and engagement. The stranger's presence catalyzed this process, but the principles extended to intertribal interaction as well. Cooperation, anticipation, and reflective attention became embedded in the culture, enhancing cohesion, empathy, and relational intelligence. Even in the most delicate balances of trust and shared understanding, challenges and conflicts inevitably arise. The growing interactions between the tribe and the strangers, while rich in learning and connection, also introduced uncertainty, tension, and occasional friction. Human behavior, no matter how carefully observed or interpreted, is inherently unpredictable, and the delicate equilibrium of observation, trust, and shared knowledge was vulnerable to disruption. The tribe quickly realized that engagement with the unfamiliar required not only curiosity and attentiveness but also vigilance and strategic response. The first challenges appeared subtly. Misunderstandings arose over gestures that were ambiguous, sequences that were misread, and tokens whose intention was unclear. A stone offered as a sign of goodwill might be misinterpreted as a claim or an intrusion. A gesture intended to invite attention could be perceived as threatening. These moments demanded careful reflection and discussion among the tribe. Elders emphasized the importance of patience, to observe before reacting, to seek clarification through gestures, and to integrate multiple perspectives before drawing conclusions. Misinterpretation, they understood, could escalate into conflict, and careful attention remained the primary tool for prevention. Environmental factors amplified tension. Shared resources, berries, water sources, and pathways, became arenas where competing interests had to be navigated with delicacy. The stranger's actions, while deliberate, occasionally intersected with the tribe's routines, provoking unease. A child startled by sudden movement, a hunter whose path was briefly blocked, or a forager discovering an altered landscape all reminded the tribe that coordination was not automatic. Observation and reflection had to be extended to anticipate not only gestures but also spatial and temporal interaction. The natural world, while familiar, became a stage for negotiation and adaptation, where awareness and foresight were tested continuously. Internal conflicts also emerged within the tribe. Not all members interpreted gestures or intentions identically. Children, hunters, gatherers, and elders often disagreed about the meaning of a token or the appropriateness of an approach. These divergences highlighted differences in perception, experience, and emotional response. Discussion, debate, and reflection became essential processes for harmonizing understanding. Conflicts, while challenging, were not destructive. Instead, they were opportunities to refine observation, clarify principles, and strengthen collective reasoning. By navigating internal disagreement, the tribe cultivated resilience, patience, and the capacity to negotiate complexity. The strangers themselves sometimes became sources of tension, albeit unintentionally. Cultural differences, unfamiliar gestures, and varied priorities occasionally clashed with tribal expectations. A gesture meant to communicate curiosity might appear intrusive or ambiguous. A token offered with enthusiasm might be misaligned with context or timing. The tribe learned that intentions, though often benign, could be misinterpreted without careful observation. The ongoing challenge was to maintain engagement while balancing caution, reflection, and the ethical management of risk. Each interaction required vigilance, attention, and adaptability. Children's responses to conflict were particularly instructive. Their curiosity and imagination often led to experimentation that disrupted established patterns. A child might reach for a token impulsively, misalign a gesture, or misinterpret an action. Elders guided these moments carefully, transforming potential disruption into learning. Children became active participants in understanding cause and effect, intention and consequence. Through observation, reflection, and gentle correction, the tribe reinforced principles of social behavior, anticipation, and relational intelligence, ensuring that conflict became a tool for cognitive and emotional growth rather than a source of harm. Conflicts also arose in the negotiation of proximity and space. The tribe valued defined zones for safety, resource access, and ritual practice. The strangers, unfamiliar with these social and environmental boundaries, occasionally encroached inadvertently. Initial reactions were cautious, movements slowed, gestures of caution or inquiry were employed, and observation intensified. Through repeated encounters, the tribe refined strategies for communicating boundaries non-verbally. Gestures, postures, and token placement became instruments for managing space, demonstrating that even conflict could be navigated through careful attention, intentionality, and adaptive communication. Emotional tension intensified in moments of perceived risk or ambiguity. Fear, excitement, curiosity, and caution intertwined, creating a complex affective landscape. Elders encouraged acknowledgement of these emotions, framing them as data rather than impediments. A startled reaction or a sudden hesitation was not merely instinct, it was information, revealing perception, expectation, and cognitive processing. By integrating emotional responses with observation and reflection, the tribe developed nuanced strategies for engagement, mitigating the intensity of conflict and enhancing relational awareness. Patterns of misinterpretation became central to understanding challenges. Certain gestures, when repeated, were initially misread, leading to minor misunderstandings. Yet the iterative process of observation, discussion, and adjustment gradually reduced ambiguity. The tribe learned to anticipate missteps, correct interpretations, and adjust behavior. The process revealed that conflict is not merely an obstacle but a mechanism for refining cognition, social coordination, and ethical engagement. Through these moments, both the tribe and the strangers were co-evolving in understanding, awareness, and adaptability. The natural environment continued to test attention and judgment. Shifting light, changing weather, and unpredictable animal behavior introduced complexity into shared spaces. The strangers' responses to these variables sometimes diverged from tribal expectations, prompting reflection and recalibration. The tribe learned to interpret behavior in context, integrating multiple layers of observation, intention, environmental awareness, and temporal sequencing. Each challenge, therefore, became an opportunity to refine predictive reasoning, situational awareness, and relational intelligence. Conflict occasionally sparked innovation. When a misunderstanding arose over the placement of a token, the tribe experimented with new gestures, sequences, and positioning to communicate more clearly. Hunters tested sequences of approach and withdrawal to manage proximity. Children experimented with mirroring and anticipation, creating playful yet instructive simulations of interaction. Through these experiments, conflict became a catalyst for learning, creativity, and the evolution of shared protocols. Challenges were no longer purely negative, they were instructive, shaping patterns of engagement and fostering adaptive strategies. In the aftermath of challenges, conflicts, and careful observation, the tribe sought ways to solidify connection and reinforce trust. These moments of cohesion gave rise to rituals of bonding, deliberate practices designed to celebrate understanding, deepen relationships, and honor the fragile but growing ties with the strangers. Ritual, the tribe realized, was more than ceremony, it was a cognitive and emotional scaffold, a structured space where trust, knowledge, and social cohesion could be cultivated and transmitted. The earliest rituals were subtle, organic, and improvisational. At the end of the day, after the sun had dipped behind the horizon, the tribe and the strangers would gather near the fire, exchanging gestures and tokens in deliberate sequences. Objects were offered with care, hand placements mirrored, and attention extended to ensure acknowledgement. Even these small acts carried profound significance, they signaled respect, reinforced predictability, and demonstrated mutual understanding. Ritual, in this sense, was a language of patterns, intention, and recognition, translating observation into shared experience. Children played a central role in these bonding rituals. Their mimicry and playful experimentation often became the rhythm around which adults structured sequences of interaction. They would mirror gestures, exchange tokens, and create sequences that both celebrated learning and reinforced social connection. Elders observed closely, guiding the subtle choreography of attention and movement. Through this participation, children internalized principles of relational intelligence, anticipation, respect, fairness, and the ethical use of attention. Play became ritual, and ritual became a medium of cognitive and emotional education. Rituals extended beyond gestures and tokens to include movement and shared activity. The tribe and strangers would traverse familiar pathways together, moving in coordinated sequences that reflected observation, pattern recognition, and anticipation. Each step, pause, and gesture became a component of a larger choreography, a dance of relational understanding. By moving together, sharing rhythm and timing, the participants reinforced trust and familiarity, bridging the divide between observer and observed. These embodied practices strengthened spatial awareness, attention to detail, and the subtle calibration of action in shared space. Fire, light, and shadow became symbolic elements within the rituals. The flickering glow illuminated faces, gestures, and objects, emphasizing attention and reflection. Shadows amplified the subtlety of movement, allowing observers to detect nuance and refine understanding. Elders highlighted these visual dynamics, teaching that observation extends beyond direct action to the interplay of perception, context, and environment. Ritual became a multisensory experience, integrating sight, sound, touch, and anticipation into a coherent practice of bonding and learning. Narrative and storytelling were woven into rituals as well. Each evening, the sequence of gestures, token exchanges, and coordinated movements was recounted and interpreted. Elders emphasized patterns, cause and effect, and relational meaning, embedding lessons within story. These narratives transformed fleeting moments into enduring knowledge, linking individual experience with collective memory. The ritual space, therefore, was both performative and reflective, an arena for action and a forum for interpretation. Through ritual, observation, reflection, and story merged into cohesive, communal learning. Environmental interaction remained central. Rituals were often conducted near rivers, clearings, or trees, with attention to natural rhythms, sounds, and textures. The forest itself became a partner in the practice, offering cues, challenges, and opportunities for engagement. Water, light, and wind were incorporated into sequences of gesture and movement, amplifying awareness of environmental dynamics. Ritual, in this sense, reinforced the integration of social, cognitive, and ecological intelligence, emphasizing the interdependence of human action, relational connection, and environmental sensitivity. The exchange of tokens in ritual carried both practical and symbolic weight. Stones, feathers, carved wood, and other small objects were offered deliberately, with attention to sequence, placement, and acknowledgement. Each object became a node in a network of shared meaning, linking observation, reflection, and relational engagement. Through token exchange, the tribe and strangers demonstrated reliability, attention, and ethical conduct. Tokens were not mere tools, they were carriers of trust, memory, and collective understanding, tangible embodiments of relational principles. Philosophically, rituals revealed profound truths about human connection. Structured practice amplifies attention, reinforces predictability, and cultivates trust. Repetition, reflection, and coordinated action allow individuals to integrate observation, emotion, and cognition into coherent social intelligence. The tribe understood that rituals are not superficial or ornamental, they are foundational mechanisms for sustaining relational equilibrium, transmitting knowledge, and embedding ethical engagement into the rhythms of daily life. Children's play, elders' guidance, and stranger participation intersected in these rituals, creating a multi-layered learning environment. Patterns of attention, gesture, and sequence were reinforced, refined, and celebrated. Emotional literacy deepened, curiosity, caution, excitement, and wonder were acknowledged, modulated, and integrated into collective experience. Through ritual, the tribe learned to navigate complexity with grace, transforming observation and anticipation into ethical, relational, and cognitive skill. Movement through space, gesture alignment, and the timing of token exchanges all became codified within ritual practice. These elements reinforced the rhythm of interaction and provided opportunities for rehearsal, anticipation, and corrective feedback. Mistakes or misalignments were gently addressed, allowing participants to refine understanding without fear or shame. Ritual was thus both forgiving and instructive, providing a safe space for experimentation, learning, and relational calibration. Ritual also created temporal continuity. Daily sequences of fire, movement, token exchange, and storytelling established a rhythm, linking past observation with present action and future anticipation. Participants internalized patterns not merely as rules but as lived experience, embedding cognitive, emotional, and ethical lessons into the fabric of daily life. Ritual, therefore, became a conduit for both memory and foresight, enabling continuity, coherence, and cultural transmission. The integration of the strangers into ritual practice was transformative. Their gestures, movement patterns, and token offerings introduced novel sequences, expanding the tribe's repertoire of understanding. Observing and participating with beings from beyond their horizon accelerated learning, enhanced flexibility, and deepened relational intelligence. Ritual thus became a crucible for cross-cultural engagement, teaching the tribe that observation, reflection, and participation are essential for integrating the unfamiliar into coherent social and cognitive frameworks. Conflict, challenges, and ambiguity were also incorporated into ritual. Moments of hesitation, misinterpretation, or tension were acknowledged and addressed within structured sequences. These interventions reinforced ethical attention, anticipation, and adaptive response. Ritual provided a scaffold for managing uncertainty, enabling participants to transform potential discord into learning, reflection, and refinement of relational skill. The integration of difficulty into ceremony underscored the dynamic and adaptive nature of ritual practice. Philosophically, rituals illustrated that social intelligence, ethical engagement, and cognitive growth are inseparable. Structured practice allows observation, reflection, anticipation, and emotional regulation to converge, producing relational resilience. Ritual, in this sense, is both method and metaphor, a deliberate practice that mirrors the broader patterns of learning, adaptation, and connection in life. The tribe recognized that ritual is not merely performative, it is foundational, integrating mind, heart, body, and environment into coherent experience. By the end of these daily practices, the tribe's understanding of relational patterns, environmental interaction, and cognitive strategy had matured significantly. Ritual provided a space to rehearse attention, refine gestures, integrate observation, and deepen ethical and emotional awareness. Children, adults, and elders all participated, creating a multi-generational, collaborative, and reflective practice. Through repeated sequences, story, play, and token exchange, the tribe cultivated trust, knowledge, and relational intelligence in ways that were deeply embodied and enduring. As time passed and the rhythm of observation, reflection, and ritual became embedded in daily life, the tribe began to sense a profound transformation. Their world, once defined by familiar forests, rivers, and mountains, was now expanding beyond the horizon. The arrival of the strangers had introduced a new dimension to experience, a broader awareness of possibility, movement, and connection. The horizon was no longer a boundary, it was a threshold, a point of convergence between the known and the unknown, the seen and the imagined. The first signs of this expansion were subtle but undeniable. Hunters and gatherers began to notice patterns and paths previously overlooked. A new formation of birds, a distant smoke rising from an unseen village, or the subtle echo of human activity across a valley drew attention to the interconnectedness of space. The strangers, moving fluidly through unfamiliar terrain, demonstrated alternative ways of negotiating environment, revealing that boundaries are perceptual, not absolute. Observation of these patterns cultivated curiosity, strategy, and spatial awareness, expanding the cognitive map of the tribe far beyond immediate survival needs. This expansion was both external and internal. As the tribe's awareness of landscape, movement, and relational dynamics grew, so too did their capacity for abstract thinking. They began to consider not only the immediate consequences of action but also the potential ripple effects across time and space. Gestures, token exchanges, and shared rituals took on layered significance, embodying both immediate meaning and longer-term implications. The horizon, once a simple visual boundary, became a symbol of possibility, inviting reflection, speculation, and philosophical contemplation. Children were the first to express the new sense of wonder. They ran along riverbanks, imagining distant lands and other beings beyond the familiar hills. They mirrored the stranger's gestures, experimenting with movement, tokens, and sequences that suggested worlds larger than their own. Elders encouraged this exploration, framing it as a bridge between observation, imagination, and learning. Through play, mimicry, and story, children internalized the concept of the horizon as dynamic, a space not only to traverse physically but to explore cognitively, emotionally, and ethically. Rituals evolved to incorporate this expanded awareness. Sequences of gesture and token exchange were conducted with attention to direction, distance, and environmental context. Participants rehearsed movement along imagined or real pathways, linking observation of strangers' patterns with prediction and anticipation. Storytelling incorporated speculation about distant lands, potential encounters, and lessons learned from unseen forces. Ritual thus became a vehicle for cognitive expansion, enabling the tribe to integrate immediate experience with imagination, anticipation, and philosophical reflection. Observation of the stranger's strategies was particularly instructive. Their ability to navigate complex terrain, coordinate gestures, and anticipate consequences revealed alternative approaches to problem-solving. The tribe began to test these strategies, experimenting with new routes, foraging techniques, and social sequences. Knowledge, once localized and practical, was now relational and transferable, preparing the tribe to engage not only with immediate threats or opportunities but with possibilities beyond sight. The horizon was expanding in both literal and metaphorical dimensions. The environment itself seemed to respond to this shift. As attention broadened, subtle patterns in wind, water, and animal movement became meaningful. The flow of the river, the angle of sunlight on stone, or the tracks of distant creatures were interpreted with increased sophistication. The tribe's cognitive and sensory faculties were enhanced, integrating observation, reflection, and prediction into a seamless understanding of the landscape. The horizon was no longer a limit but a canvas for learning, anticipation, and ethical engagement. Trust and relational intelligence played a key role in this expansion. The tribe had learned that engagement with the unknown requires both caution and openness. The strangers, as guides and partners, demonstrated the value of attentiveness, consistency, and communication in navigating novel circumstances. By observing, reflecting, and participating in shared activity, the tribe internalized strategies for anticipation, negotiation, and ethical interaction. Expansion of the horizon was thus inseparable from relational skill, the capacity to understand, predict, and collaborate with beings beyond immediate familiarity. Conflict and challenge continued to shape growth. Misinterpretation, hesitation, and ambiguity were now framed as opportunities to test observation, refine strategy, and expand understanding. When paths diverged, gestures conflicted, or environmental hazards emerged, the tribe responded with deliberation, integrating lessons from past experience with imaginative foresight. Each encounter with uncertainty became a crucible for growth, reinforcing adaptability, attention, and cognitive flexibility. The horizon, in this sense, was both a literal and symbolic space of challenge, inviting reflection and active engagement. Philosophical awareness deepened alongside practical skill. The horizon came to symbolize the interplay of known and unknown, observation and speculation, action and consequence. The tribe recognized that perception is limited but expandable, that understanding emerges through attentive engagement, and that the unknown is a field for learning rather than fear. Gesture, ritual, token exchange, and environmental interaction were all integrated into a framework for navigating uncertainty, expanding awareness, and cultivating ethical relational intelligence. Children's storytelling reflected this new horizon. Tales of distant forests, imagined companions, and sequences of gesture beyond immediate observation became common. Elders encouraged these narratives, emphasizing pattern recognition, ethical reasoning, and anticipation of consequence. Play and story converged with observation, ritual, and reflection, creating a multi-layered framework for cognitive, social, and ethical expansion. The horizon, once distant and abstract, became a lived concept, a space for practice, anticipation, and philosophical inquiry. Knowledge, once fragmented and localized, now circulated with increased sophistication. Observation of strangers, integration of environmental cues, reflection on past encounters, and experimentation with gesture and movement coalesced into a dynamic, shared cognitive map. This map extended beyond immediate needs, encompassing strategy, social coordination, and ethical engagement with the unknown. The horizon, therefore, was not only physical but cognitive and relational, a framework for understanding the interconnection of space, action, and consequence. Ritual sequences evolved further, integrating horizon-oriented movement. Participants rehearsed approaches to distant spaces, mirrored complex gestures, and exchanged tokens with attention to placement, timing, and relational context. These practices reinforced observation, anticipation, and ethical engagement while embedding relational and spatial knowledge in embodied experience. Ritual became a laboratory for horizon expansion, blending play, reflection, learning, and social cohesion into a single, dynamic practice. Emotional intelligence remained central. Encounters with uncertainty, unfamiliar paths, or ambiguous gestures invoked curiosity, caution, excitement, and fear. Elders guided reflection on these emotional responses, integrating affect with observation, reasoning, and prediction. By attending to emotion as information, the tribe refined decision-making, anticipation, and relational skill. The horizon was expanded not only through cognitive observation but also through emotional literacy, teaching the tribe to navigate complexity with empathy, attention, and resilience. The expansion of the horizon also fostered philosophical reflection on the nature of knowledge, space, and human potential.